Hey, welcome, buddy. Yes, I decided to use my opener again. I know I haven't gotten around to put some music to it yet. The old music kept getting content ID'd. So, whatever. I wanted something to open with today. I am feeling a little bit better. Yesterday, as you guys may notice, I was out of it. I wasn't really on my game. I was on Drunken Peasants and didn't really have much to add. So, I've got some rest, lots of rest, matter of fact. I had some really, really weird, vivid dreams. Not lucid, but vivid. And I don't know, it kind of made me feel better, I guess, after I just got a good, nice rest. And now I'm drinking coffee again, which is probably going to repeat the cycle all over again, right? So, you can't, you sleep great, you drink coffee, you get caffeinated, and then you can't sleep for a day because the half-life of caffeine is about 5 hours, give or take. So if you have a cup of coffee that has, I don't know, what, 50 some milligrams of caffeine or something in it, that's going to last quite a while. So I usually have about 2 or 3. But anyways, good morning or afternoon, everybody. It's Sunday, and as Sunday, sometimes I do these Steve Sunday School because I'm not very original with names. And, I did a poll on Twitter, and I asked you guys, what do you guys want to talk about? Because I had 2 topics that I could discuss, one of which was a little more in depth than the other. And lo and behold, you guys actually voted both. Here it is right here. I basically asked, do you think I should talk about Matt Dillahunty hand-waving my argument away? Or do you think I should talk about Aron Ra's blog, which was pure prescriptivism? And true to form, you guys actually said both, which might be a longer show than I had anticipated, but at least I'm feeling better to do so. And I can do both. Matt shouldn't take very long, but we'll see how we proceed here. Oh, Tal says I added to the Vagisil discussion. Well, you might want to unpack that, but if you haven't, excuse me, I still have a little cough. If you haven't watched Drunken Peasants last night, go watch Rev News talk about Vagisil and Shanny, for Christ. Matter of fact, you know what? Don't do that. You know what? Just don't. As much as I would love to throw people over to Drunken Peasants to go watch Ben and Billy, that's one segment that probably best not watched by anyone ever. It was a little bit much. But anyways, let's dive into this. So let's dive into the... I don't want that yet. Let's dive into the Matt Dillahunty thing first, because I had a friend, his name's Steve, no relationship to me, but he is somebody that I know, and he decided to run my WASP argument, my weak atheist special pleading argument. Now, of course, it's a good thing he doesn't mention me because, of course, Matt hears my name, he's going to lose his mind. So I don't want anybody to go call the Atheist Experience and mention me because, it doesn't do anybody any good, right? Because they hear my name and it's just triggering to them. Josiah Hansen, $2. Here's for a longer show. I got 8 hours. I got about 8 hours. So I'm not going to go 8 hours, my friend. Might push it to 2, depending on how long this takes. I did send the link to Cheshire. I don't know if she got it, but she might pop in. But I'm going to play the audio from the Atheist Experience, something I generally don't do. I'm not going to play the video, but I'm playing the audio. A bunch of people sent me a bunch of stuff, right? I'm basically inundated with messages whenever something happens like this. Hey, Steve, they're talking about your argument or something. But in this particular case, somebody actually sent me the audio, which is really nice. So I'm going to play this audio. I'm going to make sure my desktop audio is on real quick. And let's see what Matt Dillahunty had to say when somebody actually called running, my WASP argument. Which again, I'm not gonna say that I uniquely came up with this argument. I think I uniquely formatted it. I haven't heard anybody run it as a special pleading argument before, and I don't think anybody went to the detail as much as I have on this particular argument. But like I said, the argument has kind of been around before, but not in the way I formulated it, not in the way that I argue it as if you don't allow one, then if you allow one, you don't allow the other, it's special pleading. I have the blog in my video description if you want to read the whole thing. I kind of did a real quick summation in the video description. It's basically something along the lines of, if you allow not X to be from P, not P to not BP, then you have to allow X to be not B, not P, vice BP, okay? Or else, then you're special pleading. So it's kind of an if, then, else argument. If anybody knows programming, they'll recognize that if, then, else. And Matt Dillahunty goes on to say that is basically a dishonest argument and it's semantic. Well, no, Matt, it's not a semantic argument. People have told you this. I know a logisticians have told you this. It's not a semantic argument. It is a logical argument dealing with logic, and you just hand wave it away. So let's listen to what he has to say real quick on it, and hopefully you guys can hear it, so let me know.
Say I mirror the exact same argument with theism and define it as a lack of belief in the non-existence of the deity.
That's patently absurd. That's a semantic, useless game, because what we do in logic is we evaluate propositions. There is a proposition, some God exists.
Okay, so let's analyze this little by little, and this is fair use, by the way, so I'm not playing their video, I'm playing their audio, which is completely fair use. So, all right, so... He basically starts out by saying there's a proposition to be had. Okay, I agree. There's a proposition to be had about God existing. There's also a proposition that God does not exist. If you have one, you cannot have the other. They're coextensive. For every proposition, there is a negation. And if he wants to define atheism in the negation, in the negative, not in the negation, but in the negative, then my argument is that theists can do the same thing. That's not dishonest. That is called mirroring. Nothing wrong with that at all. It is essentially saying, if you allow this, then you have to allow this, or you have special pleading.
That is the proposition that we're evaluating. And if you accept it, you're a theist. And if you don't accept it, you're a non-theist or an atheist in the weak sense.
Okay, so notice what he says here. And I'm not going to disagree with him on. He says that if you accept it, you're a theist, which is the proposition God exists. If you don't accept it, you're a non-theist, which I've said all along, or an atheist in the weak case. Okay, I'm going to, for arguendo here, and by the way, I don't know why I keep saying that. It's just arguendo. I have a bad habit of doing that. Call me out when you hear me do that. It's not for arguendo. It's just arguendo. Okay, so arguendo, I'm willing to use the terminology weak, strong cases, even though, because again, that's how my argument formulates it. I don't particularly utilize them myself. They're George Smith's kind of usages, who wrote A Case Against God. But that's kind of a myopic distinction to be made at this point. But let's go with it. So okay. So according to this argument, right? Because I'm using his wording, a weak atheist is somebody who doesn't accept theism. Okay, that's in line with my argument. Let's go with that. Okay, so continue on.
To say that the default proposition is no gods exist and theists are just rejecting that is not only dishonest, it is absurd because...
Okay, first of all, why is anybody saying it's dishonest? First of all, Steve didn't, when he called, he was the person that called. He didn't say anything about default position. My argument has nothing to do with the default position, because when you have a proposition, there is no default proposition. I have challenged many people to go find anywhere in philosophy where there's a default proposition when it comes to the ontology of God. None. They're just asserting this. Why would there be a default position? If anybody has a default position, it's probably what Graham Oppie calls innocence. And innocence are somebody who's never been exposed to the proposition, right? So if you have never even heard of the proposition of God existing or not, then yeah, okay, then you haven't evaluated it, right? So you're not theist, you're not atheist, you're just innocent with respect to the proposition. I think that's a very good disposition we have, because that's telling us something. Hey, what's this person's status toward the proposition God existing? They're innocent toward it, because they never heard of it. They've never tried to evaluate it. They haven't even suspended judgment on it, so they're not agnostic. They haven't said it's true. They haven't said it's false. They have no opinion on it whatsoever. That's a lot more nuanced than just saying, oh, somebody lacks a belief because they're unaware of the proposition, right? Now, in both cases, the person lacks a belief, but what's more descriptive of what is actually happening? What's more granular? The case we have two people, one has heard of it, but just doesn't believe, and the other one hasn't heard the proposition. It just says, well, they don't say anything because they're innocent, right? Both of them lack a belief. But in one case, it's a lot more nuanced to say that their disposition would be something along the lines of innocence. They don't have any belief or non-belief towards a particular proposition. Okay, continue on. This is a very long clip. We're halfway through already.
It fails to understand where the default position should be on an existential claim and what the null hypothesis should be.
Okay, again, it's an existential claim, but why is he assuming the existential claim should be that it doesn't exist? That's not how propositions work existentially. And why should it be the null hypothesis? A null hypothesis, again, deals with experimentation. This is where scientism comes into play. I've read quite a bit about this topic. Say what you want about my understanding of it, fine. But in my readings, I have never once found anywhere in any paper where atheism is a null hypothesis. I just haven't read anything on it. Now, if you have a paper, you have a citation from an academic source about why that is the case, not just arguing for it, but that is the case, please leave it in the comment section, or email me, or leave it on Twitter or Facebook. You know, there's a billion ways to get a hold of me. So this is something by Matt's just, you know, hey, here you go. It's a null hypothesis. Well, again, a null hypothesis is what you do an experiment against, right? What you do basically are doing is saying, I have an explanation for something. Let me do an experiment. Let's see what explains it better. My explanation, or maybe the null hypothesis. If I can have it within a margin called the p-value, I can actually say it is more likely the case that my explanation is the explanation, and I can what's called reject the null hypothesis. That's science. This is not the existential nature of God. That has to do with philosophy. You can't just arbitrarily mix these domains and say, oh, I'm going to call God not existing the null hypothesis. That's absurd. That's completely absurd. Okay, moving on.
So you can't say theism is a lack of belief in the assertion that there is no God. That's a load of crap.
Why? But again, he says this, but why? If atheism is generally held in philosophy, which even Matt recognizes this, if atheism is held in philosophy moreover as the position that God does not exist, but if you want to change it to the weak case, which he does, then why can't the theists do the same thing? That's the whole argument. You can't just say by fiat that they can't, because that is special pleading. By definition, you're excluding the ability for somebody to do something that you're doing. That is legitimately what special pleading is. And I know a lot of people that know logic, and I know a lot of people that know philosophy, and they've read this argument, and not one of them has found fault with it, except for maybe one person who has an argument against it. His name is Alan. If you know Alan, Alan takes it from a different direction. He doesn't think it's a bad argument. He talks about he's doing a more of a psychological thing. I have some issues with his argument. I know he ran it to Alex Malpass. Alex Malpass is going to supposedly evaluate it. It doesn't defeat my argument. It's just looking from a different perspective. But I still think Alan's wrong because he's talking about psychological atheism, and I'm talking about propositional atheism. So I don't think he's really addressing the problem at hand. I mean, you can't take the domain of discourse from propositional atheism and move it to psychological atheism. That's not the argument. The argument even has nothing to do with psychological facts. It has to do with if not BP is used for BP, then not B, not P is used for BP. That's it. I mean, that's the logic. So, Let Limo says, is there anything like that in epistemology, disbelieving all things by default? Sounds like a poor advocacy of skepticism. Not that I'm aware of. Skepticism nowadays has two usages, right? I mean, the general usage among people that don't really look into these topics, to them, skepticism just means ordinary doubt, right? You shouldn't believe things without sufficient cause, which is kind of goes without saying. I mean, right? I mean, I reject Clifford's principle. I'm not an evidentialist, but I mean, I do think people have reasons to believe something to be justified, right? To be rational. But we don't go around looking for disbelief. This is or even unbelief, right? We don't go around saying, "Hey, look, I don't believe you," or I think you're wrong. We can't function in society like that. And so this attitude that somehow a doubt even is some kind of virtue, which I had that debate on Non Sequitur show about, is to me ridiculous. Doubt cannot be a virtue. We don't strive for that all the time. A virtue is something you continually strive for. Why would you want to strive to doubt everything, right? Would you want to live in a world where you doubt everything? You doubt your existence. You doubt your wife says she went to the store, and you doubt her on it. Would that be a functional relationship? No. You trust certain people. You have reasons why you believe them. Why do you believe your wife went to the store and not, just some dude's house? Oh, because I trust her. Okay, so she has a past history with you, so you can formulate a belief based upon other information other beliefs that you have. Yes, okay, perfectly rational. I mean, but these new skeptics from New Atheism TM would be like, oh, well, no, I would doubt her until I had reason to believe otherwise. That's how do you want to go through life like that? But I don't think that disbelieving all things is any particular position. Now, I guess Lumo, you could say maybe a form of hard solipsism is. Solipsism doubts everything, basically. Doubts existence, right? You're the only mind that exists. And to a greater degree, you're the only thing that exists, right? Generally, when you talk about solipsism, it is that external minds don't exist? Is it the belief that external minds don't exist? It's not just the don't believe. It is the belief that external minds don't exist. But some people have taken that to a more general view and say, well, not just external minds that don't exist, but it's other things in general. It's just reality doesn't exist. It's all internalized. Or maybe just everybody else are just automatons, right? You people listening are not somebody who actually have cognitive thoughts. May not necessarily part of my mind, right? You don't have to necessarily be part of my mind, and I think that's easily shown, right? Because people know things that I wouldn't know. But you could be some kind of automatron from some kind of grand illusion kind of thing, right? Now, do I believe this? No, of course not. But I mean, that's probably the route that somebody would go. They say that when they disbelieve everything. Joias Hansen says Randolph's debunk of WASP a couple days ago was weak. Sounds like derogatory, so therefore he rejected not even a straw man. Well, Randolph Richardson, who's the head of the Atheist Canadian International Group, has got to be one of the dumbest atheist leaders I've ever seen in my entire life. I took apart his logic page, and he never bothered to correct it. He didn't care. And even people that knew logic were telling him, dude, this is just so fundamentally wrong. I mean, he didn't even understand what a predication was. And again, I am far from anybody well-versed in logic. I have a basic understanding of logic, and I really mean that. I mean, I'm not somebody that understands the nuances of logic. I understand Boolean, some predicate, some modal, some maybe even pair consistent, but it's just the bare minimum, right? I mean, so he doesn't even understand that, though. And I think a lot of people, for some reason, think when they think weak or strong. I have noticed Randolph saying things like he thinks it has to do with the amount of confidence, right? Either you're strong in your belief or you're weak in your belief, like a theist, right? You're a strong Christian, you really believe God, or you're a weak Christian, you really don't. You believe, but you're not quite sure. You're kind of wishy-washy, right? That's equivocation. That is exactly equivocation, because that's not how we're using the term weak and strong. Yeah, and I think Randolph gets confused. So when people see weak and strong, it has nothing to do with the degree of belief in the argument here. Okay, so let's finish the rest of this with Matt.
Well, then would you then say atheism is the belief that there are no gods?
No, atheism is not a belief that there are no gods. That's what I told you. Atheism is not being...
Okay. So again, Matt's being dishonest here. Matt's complete. He knows atheism is the belief that God does not exist. Now, he also includes atheism to be anybody who does not hold a belief. Okay, and that's his prerogative. He can do this, right? But think about what he said. He said atheism is not the belief that God does not exist. Okay, so somebody who has the belief that God does not exist isn't an atheist? If that's the reason he wants to argue? No. Now, I'm going to give him a little bit of principle of charity, because this is what Cheshire and I talk about. I know Matt knows these topics better than he lets on. Okay? He's not like Aron. Aron doesn't understand any of this, but Matt does. Okay? Matt is, I think, obfuscating. I think he's deliberately trying to mislead people, because what he should say is, yeah, in philosophy, atheism is generally held as a belief that God does not exist, but we don't hold it that way. We put it for a more wider scope, and we hold it atheism as anybody that doesn't believe God exists. Okay, that according to him would be true. I don't hold those positions, but at least he'd be consistent, right? At least I would say, okay, yeah, according to him, that's right. I got no issue with that. I mean, other than the fact that I think it's a poor way to define it, which is a whole different argument. But you see how he's misleading his audience? He's saying atheism is not the belief that God does not exist. Or atheism is he's saying that the belief that God does not exist is an atheism. Well, what is it? Right? I mean, that's yes, it's what it is. But he's just including weak case. Let's see here. Check my messages real quick. Yeah, and by the way, Steve, who called, is out there in the live chat. A wild sweet heathen has appeared. I hope you're doing well, sweet heathen. Min is out there. Whiz Biz, Helios. Man, we got a whole bunch of people. Maki. Fun day. All right, let's finish this off.
Convinced that there is a God.
Some people, I think, would say that is the definition, but in this case, the way that Matt and I use it, we don't use it that way.
Okay, there you go. Now, that was V, right? I believe her name is right. She's right. She's right. I have no argument with what she just said, right? And so why doesn't Matt just say the same thing? Why does Matt have to willfully mislead people on this? Because I think he does it on purpose. You know, is that her name, V? She actually understands these things. I mean, she's like, yeah, some people use it this way, and she probably recognizes it's the most often used in philosophy. They don't. Okay, then let's talk about why they don't. Let's talk about what the benefits and the utility is. Love to have those arguments. Those are great arguments, right? But Matt doesn't even get to that far. Matt just hand waves it away and says, no, the belief God does not exist isn't atheism. Of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, you don't have to accept it as a sufficient or a necessary. Well, actually, it is necessary and sufficient. You don't have to accept it as prescriptive, because it's not prescriptive. You don't have to accept it as the only definition, right? You can say, hey, look, yeah, atheism is, if you believe there are no gods, that's atheism. But it's because you don't believe. Now, he could argue that, right? He could say, hey, look, atheism is the non-belief of gods, but since you believe there are no gods, you don't believe. Perfectly logical argument from Matt. I would have umbrage with it. I'd kind of argue with him on it, but at least he's not being intellectually dishonest by arguing that way. But to say that the belief that God does not exist is an atheism, then that's an outright dishonest statement. Of course it is. I mean, it's just that what do you want to call somebody who believes there's no gods? I mean, that's generally the term for it, is atheist, right? So anyways, that's as much as I really wanted to go in with Matt. What do you guys think? That was sent to me by somebody. If they want to mention who it was, that's fine. They're in the audience. I mean, it was actually a whole bunch of people messaged me about it, but he was actually the only one who sent me the audio, which was nice. Steve says, yeah, I'm convinced he's just doing it to pander to the audience. There's no way he doesn't know this shit, especially since he discussed with Ozzy and Alex Malpass and Landon Kurt Knoll, too. Yeah, no, he knows these things. And Ozzy and Malpass have explained to him this. I mean, in no uncertain terms. And I know that, Landon has talked about my WASP argument. So, let's see. Okay, so do you guys agree that Matt is just obfuscating? I mean, but why? Again, somebody calls in and runs a really good argument. This is a good argument. Nobody that knows these topics has defeated it or even really thought it a bad argument. But he just hands it away and says it's dishonest. You can't do this. No, Matt, you're not the gatekeeper of logic and reason. Okay, you're wrong on this. You're fundamentally wrong. And I challenge anybody who agrees with Matt. I'm not going to challenge Matt because he doesn't watch this stuff, and that's fine. But I challenge anybody who watches the Atheist Experience, anybody who watches Matt, to come up with a logical proof, like I did. You go to my blog, I have a logical proof. I mean, you want to throw away logic and reason, that's your prerogative. But you can't assail an argument merely by saying, oh, this is a dishonest argument. No, it's valid and it's sound. And it's convincing because I know a lot of people are convinced by it. I mean, you don't see Malpass going around going, hey, yeah, that argument by Steve is really stupid. And I guarantee it, he'd message me. He'd be like, hey, Steve, that you got to fix this, man. And he usually does it like 4 o'clock in the morning my time because that's like noon to him, right? And even Ozzy would say, to me, it's a bad argument, Steve. But this argument has been pretty well vetted. And for Matt Dillahunty to just hand wave it away, why doesn't Sweet Heaven have a wrench? Have you seen her with power? Do you really want that Icarus to have Sweet Heathen with that much power? But I don't know why she doesn't have a wrench. Probably because she never comes around anymore. No, should I give her power? I'll give her power for a little while. See what she does with it. It could be dangerous. You don't know what you're asking for, Icarus. Josiah Hansen, $2. We know why. It's because WASP stings. Mic drop. Oh, I like that. It does sting. It stings them hard because I can't think of a defeater for this particular argument. I really can't. I mean, it's sound. And again, for him to say it's semantic, I think he does that on purpose because he knows it's not semantic. He knows it's a logical argument. And this isn't like some theist going, hey, I put one over on the atheist. I crap all over theists as well who make bad arguments. Matter of fact, I'm doing that show with Dr. Fuzz Rana on Agree to Argue. And we go over good and bad arguments, both atheist and theist arguments. And he's willing to listen. We actually agreed on some bad theist arguments. We actually agreed on a lot of bad theist arguments, even like the intelligent design arguments. Like, for example, his favorite worst theist argument is the remember that was it the laminil that looked like a T, and people were like, oh, this is laminil, this is a cross, this is proof of God's thing, and he's like, no, no, stop. Those are bad arguments, right? But when there's good arguments, people should not just hand wave them away. They should look into them. Now, I don't think there's really that many great arguments for God. I think there's at best mediocre, maybe possibilities, like argument from contingency. But for the most part, you have to really accept certain premises. You know, like I don't accept the moral argument for God. That's William Lane Craig. I think premise 1 is wrong. I would even argue maybe premise 2. I know that theoretical bullshit argues premise 2 is wrong, and he has good reason. I think that he's exactly right. And I mean, I could argue both of them are wrong, but I think to say premise 2 for the moral argument is wrong is basically you have to assume that William Lane Craig is talking about a very specific God, all right? And he does. He does. So, Sweden says, I switched accounts a while back and he never fixed it. I blame me. You see this? And unlike some people, I don't care and complain in public. But you're probably best to fix since fake accounts are happening again. Yeah, how do I know this is not a fake account? I might have just been bamboozled here. If you guys see Sweet Heathen start banning everybody, actually, it's probably her then, yeah. It's like Sweet Heathen just banning people again. So anyways, I'm moving on from Matt Dillahunty. Please leave a comment in the video. Comment what you guys think. But if you come at me, by the way, I will tell you right now, I do remove arguments, or not arguments, I do remove comments that aren't a well-formed argument, such as your meanie poopy head, Matt Dillahunty's God, anything like that. I may or may not keep. I just don't have the time or the patience to deal with any of that stuff. I do moderate my comments. If you don't like it, don't watch. I mean, if you're just like, hey, look, I think you're wrong, Steve, you know, blah blah blah. Okay, great. And even if you have a bad argument, I might you know, at least engage you. But you know, I get people from the Atheist Experience like, you know, how dare you question the great Matt Dillahunty? Well, Matt Dillahunty doesn't always make a lot of sense. And especially when it comes to these kind of topics, I think he makes some critical mistakes. Although he's gotten better, and he does normally listen to certain people. But because this argument is my argument, and he's really not a fan of mine, he just won't address it. Now, I will give him credit. He doesn't think rocks are atheist. Not much credit, obviously, because it doesn't take much to recognize that. But at least he recognizes that Aron Ra's argument that rocks are atheists that he got from Bionic Dance is horrific. So I will give him that. All right, so let's talk about Aron for a second. Actually, it's going to be about an hour or so. So Aron wrote a piece in the League of Reason, and he decided to make it to a blog on Patheos. Okay. Well, first, by the way, you guys know that Patheos is actually owned by a religious organization? Did you guys know that? Bet you guys didn't. Bet a lot of you didn't. Yeah, Patheos is not non-denominational. Patheos was bought out by evangelical Christian organization. Yes. I don't remember their name, but they actually have an agreement that you have to sign that says that you can't. There's certain things you can't talk about. It can't be too disparaging. So it's not a free blog where you can basically say whatever you want. Just tuned in. Ozzy says, do we know in what spirit Aron Ra said rocks are atheists? Was it in jest? No, it was not in jest. He makes that very clear in this blog. He does hold to Bionic Dance's argument that anything that's not in the set of theist is in the set of atheist, because he says atheist and non-theist are exactly the same. He doesn't have a distinction between them. And so if you're going to apply a little bit of set theory, in the universal set, you have the all things that are theist, and then you have the complementary set, which are all things not theist, right? Now, normally we'd call that not theist, right? Theist and not theist, which is perfectly fine. If you have one set, you have to have the other. There are two complement sets in the universal set. But he arbitrarily, semantically, argues that not theist means atheist. Now, I have had a blog that I said the only thing we know about rocks and babies and stuff like that is they're not theist. And I did at the time use the word non-theist, and I've retracted that. Because the non-theist should only hold to people, right? But it's a subcategory of not theist. So, logically, if somebody says they don't believe in God, the most I can ever deduce using deductive logic is they are not a theist, right? So not theist. But Aron says, oh, well, if I can deduce they're not theist, then according to my usages, they must be atheist, because not theist and atheist are coextensive terms. And there's some problems with that, and maybe one day we'll get into it. But when you have a proposition there's something called transparency and opacity, where if you change one word or something to something else, a coextensive reference of some kind, it could actually change the propositional value. Okay? In which case, they're not exactly the same thing. One of the most common ones people use a lot is Lois Lane and Clark Kent. If I was to say that Lois Lane, prior to her finding out that Clark Kent was Superman, if I say Lois Lane believes Superman can fly, and I change that Superman to Clark Kent, even though they're co-referential, that statement goes from true to false because she didn't know Clark Kent was Superman, right? So it's there's opacity there. It's opaque, and so these words like not theist and atheist mean different things for a reason, right? And so there's a problem when you try to say they're exactly the same thing. Aron Ra used expressively disavow that rocks were non-sentient things, could be atheist. Does he acknowledge changing his mind and why he changes his position? Yeah, he gets into this a little bit, this blog, which we're going to get into. But he was arguing on Twitter for quite some time the other day. And he was arguing basically rocks don't need a sentient. He changed his position on that. Because I remember about 5 years ago, Ozzy and Bionic Dance with Dr. Michael Jones and Pastor Bob were talking about this very topic. And, Bionic Dance was trying to convince everybody that rocks are atheist. Aron has taken that approach now. So, all right, so he basically says this. Okay, let's read his blog real quick. I'm probably not going to get too much into it. It's a very long blog. But he says, if you don't believe in any God, you're atheist. Now, this is prescriptive, right? I mean, he's not telling people about a description here, right? I mean, you could argue it's descriptive, sure. He's just saying, hey, you know what? By our usages, we're describing somebody who doesn't believe in a God. But this, I think, is a prescriptive statement, right? He's saying that you're an atheist regardless of anything else if you don't have a belief. Well, we know that's not true, right? We know that's false. That's a false statement. I don't have a God belief. I'm not an atheist. And for him to say otherwise is dishonest, because he's always like, people should label themselves how they want to label, and there's no onus to use the particular usages. None. He says, I hate to have to explain this yet again. Hopefully this one last time will be all I ever need to say about it from now on. Well, he said that numerous times. And no, Aron, you're going to have to defend yourself all the time, because there's new people coming into the community, and they all the time recognize your misunderstandings, recognize your prescriptiveness, and they recognize your assertions with having no merit whatsoever, because you cite very few academic sources, and the ones that you do cite, you cherry pick extensively, right? He says, a list of atheist organizations include the Center for Inquiry, American Humanist Association, Freedom for Religion Foundation, Foundation Beyond Belief, and Secular Student Alliance, among many others. Okay, so what? None of them have atheist in their name, because if you use that word, then you have to explain what you mean by that. And you have to argue with those who insist that it doesn't or really can mean what we all mean when identified as such. Well, no. First of all, I have no idea why they don't use the term atheist. And I don't care, how they use it per se. What I care is what you did, Aron, that you tell other people what they are. And then you lie and you say that's our argument. People that know me know I've never argued that. I don't go around going, hey, you're not a true atheist. Oh, you know what? You just hold that you don't believe in a God. You don't actually hold that gods don't exist. You're not a true atheist. That's not my argument. It's never been my argument. People have lied to Aron about this and saying that is my argument, and he has never bothered to actually look and find my arguments and see that has never been my argument. In fact, in 2018, I put out a list of my positions on my blog that says, here's Steve McRae's positions to avoid to have straw man abatement. He doesn't care. He has continually said that that's my argument. It's not. But okay, so if somebody insists upon that argument, right, Aron? If somebody says, "Hey, look, you're not a true atheist," then tell them they're wrong too. You can argue back on that. I would tell him that you're silly to argue who's the no true atheist fallacy. I don't do that, right? And it's sad that we have to ask what we mean by this, right? What we identify as such. The reason why people have to ask that is because of people like you, Aron. Because you guys have adopted this new type of approach to negative defining things that Dr. Michael Martin had kind of talked about and wanted, and Dr. Anthony Flew. If you guys have never done this, there would be no problem, right? People would know what it meant for hundreds of years, 400 years. People knew. You're an atheist? Oh, yeah, you hold the position there were no gods. That's generally what people understood it as being. Now, there might have been some other cases. I mean, Holberg, he held to a lesser case, it seems, but that's about it. But in philosophy, that's the whole point of Anthony Flew's paper in 1972, The Presumption of Atheism, is that he was arguing, yes, atheism is the belief that God does not exist, but I want it to be thought of as somebody who does not believe. He wanted it to be redefined in the negative. That was his whole paper in 1972. But of course, you got Matt Dillahunty saying, well, that's not what atheism is. Atheism is, nobody says that atheism is the belief that God does not exist. No, that's not true, Matt. I mean, that's the whole point of Anthony Flew's paper, right? So I don't know why this is even an argument here. It's the only reason why people are going to be asking, well, what do you mean by atheism, is because Aron and atheist organizations have wanted to redefine it. And they can. I'm not saying they can't, by the way, but it just confuses things. So we go. Hopefully you guys can see this. He says, if you Google atheism, you will see it's disbelief or lack belief in the existence of God or gods. Okay. First of all, that is descriptive. Second of all, disbelief and lack belief are not synonymous. Lack of belief is merely unbelief. Disbelief entails unbelief, but unbelief doesn't entail disbelief. I had this very discussion with Aron that I try to explain to him, look, epistemically speaking, disbelief is the hold in the negation. And I gave him overwhelming evidence for it. And so basically, this is describing usages. For some reason, Aron thinks when he sees this, it's prescription. He is thinking that this is what is prescribed that this word must mean. When instead, it's just giving synchronic usages, meaning that just usages for the time versus diachronic, which is overtime. And so he's just saying, hey, look, this is how Google defines this. This is not science. Science uses prescriptive definitions more often, right? Or math, right? If I say 0 factorial is defined to be 1, that's prescriptive, right? That's not describing usage. That's telling you how to use it. When you Google atheism, it's not telling you how to use the word. It's telling you how people are using it. And yes, this is true. People are using the word atheist as disbelief or lack of belief. That's a disjunction, right? That disjunction is one or the other. Well, it could be both because one entails the other. So it's not exclusive or. Amir says, Aron Ra goes into philosophers' rejection of his prescriptive usage of atheism because it's inconvenient for his activist agenda. Yes, oh yeah, he gets into that. And you're absolutely right. And by the way, people laughed at me when I said that before. Matter of fact, they even laughed at Ozzy when Ozzy was having a discussion with Aron, and he said it's for political reasons. And yeah, it is. It's for political reasons. Dave Silverman admitted it's for political reasons. And he doesn't really want to talk about this topic any longer because I think he realizes that I'm more right than he wants to admit. But yeah, it's for demographics, absolutely. He says this is the common usage. Okay, it's a common usage among people that don't really use these terms in any academic sense. I mean, the common usage of theory, it means guess, right? So what? I mean, is evolution a guess? Notice that Google also defines disbelief as, quote, the inability or refusal to accept that something is true or real. That's called a sense of a word, Aron, right? Right? This is a sense of the word disbelief, right? They stare at disbelief, right? That would be the sense of the word, as in the inability or refusal to accept that something is true or unreal, or real. But that's not how the sense of the word is being used epistemically when we talk about dispositions toward a proposition. The epistemic disposition of disbelief means belief in the negation. That's how the word is used. I hate to break it to Aron, but words have multiple usages, especially in different domains of discourse. When we're talking about atheism, we're talking about philosophy. When we're talking about theism, we're talking about philosophy. When we're talking about existential claims, we're talking about philosophy. We're talking about ontology, we're talking about philosophy. So he's taking a word, disbelief, that has a normative usage in epistemic dispositions, and he's using some other sense of the word. I don't know if that's just sheer dishonesty at this point or just complete ignorance. I mean, I don't know. Well, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but after this point, I don't know how much more I can give him because I've seen him be dishonest. this is something that I think that he probably, well, I don't want to assign motive. It's hard, but I can tell you right now, it's obvious that either he doesn't understand it, or he just doesn't want to understand, right? So he says this issue here is that some philosophers insist that disbelief cannot simply mean one is unconvinced that the claim is true. Well, it could. People have used it that way, right? Again, words don't have intrinsic meanings, right? But again, the normative understanding of disbelief when it comes to a proposition is the belief God does not exist. Why doesn't Aron ever address that? Why does he ever say this, right? I mean, he doesn't ever, like, admit this. That's why I don't get it. I am Moon. I can't hide people. I would. Oh, well, let me get some power there, Moon. You want power? You got power? You got power. Because I'm trying to read this. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have left one for you. My bad, Moon. You get the next ones. They'll come back. They always do. Let's see here. Similarly, some philosophers say that atheism cannot merely be the absence of belief that any gods exist, but that it can only be the presence of belief that no gods exist. Okay, here we go. Citation, please. I have read so much on this topic. This is one topic that I can safely say, as a layperson, I have probably read more than 99% of the community. Okay? And I don't say that often. I make people sure that I what my knowledge level is about. But on this particular by the way, if you're gonna come here and you're just gonna like talk crap, you're just gonna be removed. I don't have time with it, so you're gonna get a timeout. I just don't have the patience. I really don't. We want people to be learned. We want people to be able to have these conversations. If you just want to drag down the conversation, go somewhere else. You're not welcome. All right. So I want a citation for this, right? Where is a philosopher that has said any of this? I have never seen a philosopher say atheism cannot merely be the absence of belief. Not one. Name one, Aron. Where's your evidence? And that can only be the presence of belief that no gods exist. Again, never once have I seen a philosopher say this. That is either an outright lie, Aron, or you have self-deceived yourself to the point where you are believing things with no evidence, because there is no evidence of that particular statement. I challenge anybody to find evidence for that statement. What philosopher has said this, Aron? And by the way, it says some. I mean, it sounds like multiple. Do you guys know any philosophers that said this? Because I have no knowledge of any. Who is he would even be referring to? Oppie doesn't even say that. Amir says, I was on the Israel version of AXP earlier today. There's an Israel version? Really? They were definitely more cordial and less dogmatic than their American counterparts. I didn't know they had a version. I've been asked to call, was it Talk Heathen or Truth Wanted? I think it was Truth Wanted. Objectively, Dan. He said he would have a conversation about this. I might take him up on that. Yeah, no, hey, look, I mean, if anybody them want to have a conversation, I'd be happy to. But, Aron and Matt have shut down conversation because they just don't want to be honest about it. Right? I'm sorry, but this statement that Aron says is false. Unless he can have evidence for it. I challenge, where's the evidence of this? I don't know any philosophers that say this. Atheist linguist says gods are the only beings about which we truly and reflexively make atheist agnostic distinctions. No, they're not. What about aliens? Alien life. People either believe, disbelieve, or they suspend judgment on alien life, right? That happens all the time. And, that might be other things too. I mean, granted, I disbelieve fairies exist. I disbelieve leprechauns exist. But I know there might be like Bigfoot. Somebody might go, you know what? I do think there's reasons to believe something like Bigfoot exists. I don't, right? Or somebody might just say, look, I don't have a position on either way. All right, so again, can somebody let me know if they can find anywhere? This is the quote. I'm put in the live chat. That's the quote from Aron. Let's not forget that, because again, Aron's all big into evidence, but where's his evidence for this? Yeah, Whizbiz says, Aron Ra is no longer concerned with what he says. I caught him on Twitter saying multiple times that atheism is only a lack of belief after recognizing his polysemous. I know, he contradicts himself. I saw that thread. Right, he has a contradiction there. All right, Wikipedia. And again, look, I don't mind people using Wikipedia for a general source. I use it myself, but let's be realistic here. It's not like your most academically high standards. But as a starting point, I generally don't have a problem with it. But as your only citation, yeah, I'm probably going to go, well, I need a little bit more than that. You know, it's like, this is a general usage. But he explains, atheism in its broadest sense is the absence of belief in the existence of deities. Okay, again, not prescriptive. Less broadly, atheism is a rejection of the belief that deities exist. Okay, rejection is understood as the assertion of negation. In an even narrower sense, atheism is specifically the position that there are no deities. Atheism is contrasted with theism, which in its most general form is the belief that of at least one deity exists. Okay, I don't have a problem with any of this so far. This is describing things, right? It's describing sensu lato, sensu stricto, and sensu strictissimo. These are the three senses that the word atheism is generally held by, right? Sensu lato means broad, sensu stricto means strict, and sensu strictissimo is the most strictest sense, right? Atheism is the belief that at least one deity exists, and atheism is not a belief that any deity exists. Well, no, that doesn't necessarily follow, Aron. This is what we're trying to explain to you. That doesn't necessarily follow. Because all you're doing is saying logically that if theism is the belief, then not theism would be not the belief. And you're saying not theism equals atheism. You haven't established that beyond anything besides it's a semantic argument by saying, hey, I'm going to prescriptively say that atheism is not theism. When, by the way, Wiki even says in here, in the stricta case, that's not true, right? So if there's a case where atheism and non-theism are not synonymous, which Wikipedia points out in the sensu strictissimo case, they are not coextensive. You cannot substitute one for the other randomly. Because in deductive logic, you can only get from theist, not theist. That's the best you can get. After that, you're just ascribing some kind of semantic meaning to it, right? Aron is doing what's called a semantic argument, right? That's it. He is saying that atheism equals not theism, and there you go. That's how he gets, by the way, to argue that rocks are theist, right? Either you're theist or not theist. And again, he has talked to people that have convinced him that this makes sense. I mean, he's talked to people that don't understand, I think, logic very well, and they think they're being big-brained by going, oh, theism and atheism are your only two categories, so if you're not in one, you must be in the other, right? But again, either you're a duck or you're not a duck, right? Either you're a cow, you're not a cow. Okay, that's basic logic. We all get that. But we don't call non-cows, you know, some word that we describe them as. Right? We don't call non-ducks some word we describe them as. Generally, we don't describe the not case in most cases, right? And like in my blog that I wrote, you know, I described veganism, right? That's veganism is really not somebody described as somebody who doesn't eat meat. It's described as somebody who is abstained from eating meat, right? There's a purpose for why they're a vegan, right? So you can't just say that rocks are vegan because, you know, they don't eat meat, because it would make no sense to ascribe the property of vegan or vegetarian. I should say vegetarian. Vegan is meat or meat products. You can't really ascribe vegetarianism or veganism to a rock, right? I mean, it makes no sense. It just diminishes the purpose of having some contextual understanding to that term. Now, if you say veganism is the abstinence of eating meat or meat products, now you have a more nuanced, meaningful usage of that term, right? Because a rock isn't abstaining. Right? There's a verb that's going on there, right? There's something doing something. What are you doing? I'm abstaining from eating meat and meat byproduct. Much better way to describe something, right? Because according to Aron's usages, rocks would be vegan and vegetarian if they don't eat meat, right? So. Michael Cruz said, similarly in various streams, James has said things out of context, could be construed as prescriptivist out of context. Yeah, but look, that's out of context, right? I don't prescribe usages. I tell people how these words are generally used in the academic field, in philosophy, what's more common. Yeah, and I keep on saying this. And I know Ozzy gets on me for it, but hey, you know what? I don't agree with Ozzy on everything. He doesn't have to agree with me on everything. I think that by explaining to people how these words are typically used, if you go read a paper on it, it's going to make more sense. Like I read a paper the other day, and it specifically says atheism, theism, suspension of judgment, belief, disbelief, suspension of judgment, right? And if somebody says, well, wait a minute here, atheism is just merely not believing, and suspension of belief is not believing, disbelief is not believing, where's the differences in these terms that they're using, right? But there is a difference in these terms. They're using them in 3 different ways. Atheist would be somebody who believes, disbelieves would be somebody who doesn't. Theism would be believes, atheism or disbelieving is somebody who doesn't, and suspend judgment is somebody who doesn't believe, but doesn't hold the belief that God does not exist, right? But again, you can frame it any way you want. This is the mistake that Matt Dillahunty makes. If the proposition is God exists, I can frame it in the negation of God does not exist. Why not? I mean, you have to have a reason for that, or else it is special pleading. Okay, so he says the contrast is between believers and unbelievers. Okay, whether you either believe or you don't believe, I don't think anybody argues that, right? Not between believers and believing the claim is true versus believers believing that the claim is false. Well, again, that's not a dichotomy, right? Believing that's true and believing it's false is not dichotomous, right? Dichotomy would be believing it's true and not believing it's true. Now they're called what's called contradictories. If you believe it's true, it's a contradictory to believe it's false. The reason being is both of them cannot be true at the same time, and both can be false at the same time, right? Both can be false, both can't be true, right? And the reason being is, let's say that you have a Jewish person and a Christian. Both of them believe God exists, right? If neither God exists, they're both wrong, right? If the Muslim God was the true God, both of them are wrong, right? So they can't both be true. The Jewish God and the Christian God can't exactly be the same being that exists. You look at it very, very myopically as far as like the theology. So they both can't be true. If one is true, the other's false. If the Jews are true, then the Christians are false. The Christians are false, then the Jewish are true. It's one or the other, but they both can be false, right? I am told. I'll make sure you guys can still see this. I am told that there are reasons why some philosophers insist on this unnecessary, restrictive, and counterproductive definition, which only diminishes atheists individually and collectively. But thus far, the only explanation these antagonists have given why they insist on opposing these prescriptivist restrictions is that I'm stupid and dishonest, as if everybody who shares my opinion is dishonest too. Wow, that's a mouthful. First of all, again, what philosophers are saying this? Aron, you can't just throw this on a blog saying some philosophers. Give me citations of this so I know who to go address, because if I find philosophers saying this, I'll go after them. I will go after them. If they're alive, if they're willing to have a discussion, I'll contact them. I've got some connections. If they're dead, then I'll have a seance. I'll get a Ouija board. I got connections there too. We'll call them up, see what they think. But I don't know any philosophers that think this. And it's not counterproductive. It is showing that you're willing to throw away logic and reason merely to suit your dogma, which is the same complaint you have with young Earth creationists. You're doing the same thing they are. You have argument from consequence. You even told me if Steve's right, or it was like, if you're right, then my life's work is for naught, is your words, right? Your whole life has been for wasted if I'm right, which is ridiculous. And first of all, it's argument from consequences, but it's not true. You could perfectly accept my paradigm, and it wouldn't change anything. It just make you more consistent with logical reasoning. That's all. But it doesn't diminish any atheist or individual collective. Matter of fact, I can tell you right now, most atheists that have adopted the scheme that generally used in philosophy, they become better at argumentation. They become better at debates. They become better at having discourse with theists. And you can ask them yourself. I've probably got some in the live chat right now. So no, it has nothing to do with individual or collective trying to diminish anything. And we're not antagonists. And look, I don't think you're stupid, Aron, when it comes to like biology. I have the utmost respect for Aron when it comes to these topics. In philosophy, Aron is inept. He is the Ken Hovind of philosophy. I'm sorry, he just is. But you got to know your limitations. Look, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm inept in a lot of subjects. Who cares? You want to know about geology? Don't come to me. I'm going to suck at it, okay? There's a lot of subjects I am completely inept in, and I admit it. But you know what? I don't pontificate on those subjects. I don't write blogs on those subjects. I don't have a channel where I go out and I discuss those topics on things that I'm inept on. Do you want to learn brain surgery from me? You're going to kill somebody. Why? Because I know nothing about it. Right? I mean, this is what I'm saying. Aron has a forum. He has people that listen to him. And he's pontificating on topics where every philosopher has told him that he's just nonsensical or he's wrong. And he's still throwing out these, some philosophers insist on this unnecessarily restrictive and counterproductive definition while he's actually doing it. He's actually prescribing usages. He says, I'm imposing this prescriptive restriction. Well, what are you doing, Aron? You're prescribing that atheism is anybody who doesn't have a belief. You're insisting that is the case, contrary to philosophical usages. Josiah, $2. That's definitely not why I said he was being dishonest. What was that regards to? Josiah. Steve says depends on what Judaism is being referred to. Yeah, I mean I'm just saying that if you have two people that believe in certain types of gods that they're mutually exclusive beings, then they both can be false. They can't both be true. A contrary is such that one has to be true, the other one has to be false. They both can't be true at the same time, but they both can be false. Both can be false. But a contradictory is that they both can't be true at the same time. They both can be false at the same time. One must be true, the other must be false. In other words, God must exist or must not exist. Well, not must, I should say. God exists or does not exist. That's it. That's it's either or, right? There's no other options, right? For example, the National 501c3 organization, American Atheists, say atheism is one thing, a lack of God. So what? So what? I'm not part of American Atheist. They're not a citation. Matter of fact, Pam Whistle from the American Atheist, who's their editor-in-chief and does their PR, has specifically said to me to tell people, stop using American Atheist as a philosophical source. They're not. They are a political source. Her words, political. That's what they are. She's their PR person, right? And he goes on. It goes on to say, you know, to be clear, atheism is not, quote, necessarily a disbelief. This is dishonest right here. This is dishonest as hell, Aron. If you go to American Atheist and you actually read this particular quote, this word is not in there. This is a quote. This means quotation, Aron. When you're quoting a source, you know, if you want to throw in your own words, that's fine, but you have to let people know it's your own words, right? You have to at least people tell, and by the way, you added that word necessarily because you didn't like my argument that you disagreed with American Atheist, because you keep claiming that atheism is not a disbelief. And I told you, wait a minute, American Atheist says it's not a disbelief. You're saying it is disbelief because he's using disbelief differently, right? So let me clarify that. He's actually saying that atheism is a disbelief in gods, and he's using disbelief to mean unbelief. American Atheist is using disbelief in the epistemic sense of belief in negation. And I explained to him one time, look, they're using this word differently than you. They're saying atheism is not a disbelief. But now he throws in that word necessarily as some kind of cognitive modifier here. I'm sorry, but that is dishonest, man. Because that's not what American Atheist was saying. They're not saying not necessarily. Right? Now, I would agree with that. Atheism is not necessarily a disbelief in gods, only because people have used it in the weak case. People have used it as lack of belief. Okay, so atheism is not necessarily a disbelief. It's the most common usage in academia. Again, go read a paper on it. I don't find any papers that use it any different. But see how Aron throws in that word that changes the entire context of that statement and doesn't let anybody know? I don't know. I got a problem with that. Similarly, Atheist Alliance International agrees. By the way, I'm going to be having John, I don't remember his last name, from Atheist International, talk to me on this particular topic. He says he would. Don't know when yet. We're trying to arrange it. I'm going to have Chris Attlee kind of facilitate that. Josiah says he wasn't called dishonest for what he wrote. I called him dishonest for claiming to know the first use of atheist after admitting he didn't know that it was used BCE. Yeah, no, I know that. Atheism goes back a long time. One of the first usages that I can find does go back BCE. I don't remember the guy's name. Off the top of my head, it was a Greek dude. But For atheos, it meant without gods, which is the etymological root, which again, they love the etymological fallacy. Well, atheism is, without gods, therefore atheism is without gods. Well, no, that's an etymological fallacy to say that a word usage today in modernity is how the word it has been used or is structurally used by its roots. And that term was actually used by Christians to describe, what people describe Christians that didn't believe or actually believed that the Roman gods were false, right? They withheld their prayers to them. It was called the doctrine of disbelief, or basically the doctrine of false gods. And so they held to the doctrine that those gods didn't exist, right? There was only one true monolithic God, and that was the God of the Christians. So atheists referred to them as people that believed only in one God. So terms do change, right? Words usages do change. And again, why is he quoting these citations as if they're any kind of academic sources, right? I don't belong to Atheist International. Theism is the belief that gods are gods. The prefix a means without or lack of. It also means not. And he says, therefore, atheism means without a belief in God or the lack of belief in gods or gods. No, this is a fallacy. This is literally called the etymological fallacy. In academia, the a prefix, which is called the Greek alpha privative, is thought as not when it comes to propositions, right? Again, you have to look what domain of discourse you're in. Dr. Draper makes it very clear in Stanford Encyclopedia in his paper. The a ought to be thought as not and not as without. That means the negation of the proposition, right? Not negation of the belief, negation of the proposition. So if the proposition is God exists, then the negation is that God does not exist. So if you believe God does not exist, that is what atheos represents by that a negation. It means not, right? So him by just saying, well, a means without is just wrong. I should say it's just wrong. It can mean without. It could also mean a lot of other things too. But he's insisting that a means without here, because atheos came from without gods, that it must be means this. That's a fallacy, right? And again, we try to get people to recognize fallacies here, and yet Aron Ra and Matt Dillahunty have a plethora of them. I pointed out like 5 fallacies Aron did the other day. Yeah. Let's see here. Is this the hill you want to die on? I'm not dying on any hill. I'm absolutely right. How can you die on a hill when you're right? You die on a hill when you're trying to argue something that you're wrong on, right? Let Lumo, wasn't being atheist part of the crimes Socrates was apparently accused of, including corrupting the youth and heresy? I fully don't. Yeah, I think he was. I know he was charged with corrupting the youth, and he had to drink hemlock, right? Was it hemlock? I think I was pretty sure it was hemlock. English linguist, yeah. Argument from etymology makes me cringe. And by the way, he is a linguist. He's a professional linguist. If we consider etymology to be binding, then there are many words that we're all using wrong. Exactly, yeah. And I argue there's no right or wrong usage per se. I don't think there's any. Look, when we talk about morality, people can argue there's something that's right or wrong, right? Unless you're a relativist, people can argue that something is inherently wrong or absolute wrong or even wrong when it comes to situational ethics. But there's some matter of the fact that makes something right or wrong, right? I don't think there's a fact of the matter that makes something right or wrong in word usages, because there's nothing we can appeal to. Now, you can say that's an incorrect usage as far as the normative usages, but I can make a word mean anything I want if I define it that way. So if you're saying with respect to how a word is commonly understood, that's a fine, right? But there's nothing inherent that makes a word right or wrong. We use those terms. We say, we misuse a word. I do it all the time. People know that I have a habit of misusing words. It's my charm. But you can't just say there's some kind of ontological fact of the matter to be had that word is wrong. You can't compare it to anything, right? There's no correspondence. At least that's the way I kind of feel now. I'm up for revision. If somebody could actually point me out, like maybe a semantic theory, like that relates some kind of semantic to some kind of truth, I just don't know what it would be, right? Because correspondence theory, there has to be some kind of ontological instantiation to make something true, or at least in some theories there has to be some kind of truth condition, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a truth maker which is instantiation, but some kind of truth condition. But again, that's up for discourse. I think if somebody wants to argue that words do, you can say they're right or wrong. But that's a meta position, right? That really is a meta position, whether we say you're using a word right or wrong as compared to something, as in having what objective measure we say this word is being used wrong, because a word is just a signifier. And if I say nova, okay, in Spanish that means no go, but in English that's a car, right? It's just a word, nova. So if I say, well, Hispanics are using the word, or Americans are using the word nova wrong by labeling it a car, what does it mean car, but a type of car? Well, that would be a good choice because it's just a type of car, right? It means no go. Bad decision to name a car Nova. But me think, what's a good word that's used in English and Spanish, completely different meanings, right? It doesn't matter. Pick a word, but I mean, a certain word may have one meaning in one language and a different meaning in another language, right? It's just a word. Atheist Republic. Atheism is a very broad term, even though it's basically interpreted as a rejection of belief in the existence of gods. Well, here's the funniest thing. Again, rejection is commonly understood under Frege Geach, rejectionism, as the acceptance of negation. What do you mean by rejection? Now, you can argue, well, rejection means to not accept. Okay, in general parlance, that's actually true. But in most cases, I'm not going to say all, I've seen some exceptions, but in most cases, when the rejection of P means to accept negation. Right. Again, you have to be specific whether you mean a classical rejection or, if you mean to mean rejection is not accept. Linguist says there's the arbitrariness of deciding which sequences of sounds have which meanings is defining characteristic of human language. Yeah, and as you well know, the beetle in a box argument by Wittgenstein is a private language argument, right? If you had a bunch of people that had a box, and inside that box was a beetle, and you're trying to describe that beetle using a language that only you understand, you're all going to have a different understanding of what's actually in that box, right? What is a private language of one? Can you even have a private language of one? Because language is meant to convey something to somebody else. If you don't have anybody else to convey anything to, is that even a language? If you're just one person, you're just making up sounds and saying this has this, interpretation to it, but you're already the one interpreting it. Nobody else is interpreting it. So I don't know if you can even have a language with only one person. Maybe not. I don't know. Again, great discussion for another time. Let's see here. The term is contrasted with theism, which suggests there exists one entity. Yeah, they're called, again, contradictories. If theism is true, atheism is false. If atheism is false, theism is true. This is why it makes sense to do it that way, to have atheism as a proposition, God does not exist, because then you can say atheism is true or not. If you don't have that proposition, it makes no sense to do it. If you say atheism, lack of belief, then it makes no sense to say atheism is true. And this is the problem that Michael Martin ran into in his own book. He switched usages. He would use atheism as a lack of belief sometimes, and then he would also use it as propositionally, by saying atheism is true or atheism is false, right? You can't ascribe a truth value to atheism unless it's propositional. Unless you have to say that atheism is the belief. The word atheist dates back to 5th century BC. Greek word atheos actually goes back further than that. It does go back to BC. Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry. Okay, he's right. Yeah, 5th century BC. Yeah, didn't see the BC. He's right. It's I thought it was 5th century AD. But yeah, it's about 500, 600 years BC was atheos, right, which means without gods. But that was, again, it wasn't had to obviously do with Christian gods. But at that point, I think they were using it as somebody who just had a skeptical mindset, right? And I can't remember the Greek's name that they were prescribing it to, but he probably thought there were no gods. Over the years, the application of the word has narrowed down significantly thanks to the spread of free thought, skeptical inquiry, and an increase of criticism of religion. Today, there are a few people who understand the concept completely, and that is why atheism is often misunderstood and vilified to a large extent. Different people perceive atheism differently, and hence it is difficult to determine the total number of atheists in the world. Well, again, it's not if you use terminology with some kind of nuance. If you just say atheism is the belief that God does not exist, we understand that. If you say non-theist, we understand that. But what they want to do is they want to be able to say how many atheists are in the world, and we want to have as many atheists in the world as possible. So we're going to instead of having atheism as the belief God does not exist, we're going to say anybody who doesn't believe is an atheist for demographics, which again, I think is dishonest. Are they allowed to do that? Yes. But it's prescriptive, right? Note that this last citation says that the original definition of atheism was simply godless, being in some sense without gods, without theism. And that later on some philosophers imposed a newer, narrow restriction. That's not necessarily the case. We don't know what the original term was for how these people believed back then. They might have been belief that the gods didn't exist, right? Without gods, if you believe there are no gods, it entails you're without gods. So you can't really make that conclusion. All these and each of the other activist groups promoting skeptical atheism, science education, secular policies, and humanist values identify as unbelievers are contrasted with believers. Okay, well, you either have one or you don't, right? Irreligious unbelievers are the fastest growing demographic with respect to religion. Again, demographics already outnumbering Catholics and even Protestant Christians in the U.S. Okay, then argue that, right? Talk about people that are religious versus irreligious. Talk about people that have religious beliefs versus people that don't have religious beliefs. But to prescribe somebody as a particular position that they don't hold is dishonest. I'm sorry. It's just wrong. You cannot say anybody who says that they don't have a God belief is an atheist. You're wrong. You're fundamentally wrong. You're demonstrably wrong. Because all you're doing is arguing the way we define these words. Right? But the rest of the world doesn't do this. The academic community doesn't do it that way. Philosophy doesn't do it that way. You can't prescribe your usages on the rest of the world. This is what young earth creationists do. Oh, we're going to say that evolution is just a theory. And a theory is just a guess. Or evolution just means change. That's legitimate what they do. Just scroll down a bit. Note that neither of these definitions include a belief in gods. Well, yeah, but again, these are descriptive. So the lack of belief definition is still inclusive of both sets. No, it's not. A lack of belief does not include people that, well, okay, I think I see what he's saying. So lack of belief includes both sets of people that believe God does not exist and there's lack of belief. That is true. It's a necessary precondition, right? Lacking a belief in God is a necessary precondition for atheism. The argument is it sufficient? They argue it's sufficient. I argue it's not sufficient. The reason being it's not sufficient is simply demonstrated. If somebody told me they lack a belief in God, I don't know what their position is. I couldn't guess. All I can say is they're not a theist. But I can't determine deductively if they're an atheist because they may not use the usages of these groups, right? They may not use the same terminology, right? They might actually be somebody who understands philosophy and says, yeah, look, I don't use these lay people usages. I go by the academic normative usage. And I mean normative as in most common. I don't mean normative as prescriptively you must use it that way. And I've clarified that so many times. I don't know how many times I could say it. Normatively just means most common. It's normal. And maybe you ought to use it that way because if you want to go read a paper, that's how it's going to be used, right? So if you want to use normative as an ought, sure, you ought to use it that way if you want to go read a paper, because if not, you're going to be very confused. But I don't prescribe it as normatively you ought to use these things because, well, you have to, right? That's not prescribed that way. I just think it's a better argument. There's better arguments to use it those ways than not. Some of the antagonistic philosophers. Who are these antagonistic philosophers? Could you guys name one? Because I don't know. He never mentions anybody. And I know a lot of philosophers seek to prohibit atheist groups from identifying by the one criteria that matters to us. No. Again, who? Citation, please. Nobody has ever said that I've ever heard say Atheist Experience, Atheist Alliance International, American Atheist, Atheist Republic can't use these terms the way they want. Nobody's argued that they can't. I certainly haven't. So who the hell are you talking about, Aron? Are you making up some weird boogeyman that doesn't exist? By insisting instead that we cannot not believe. Why not? Again, who the hell are you talking about here? Who's messaging me? Oh, okay. Hang on a sec. Might have somebody coming in here in a second. I did have a room up, and I don't know what I did with it though. There we go. All right, so I don't know. Again, I don't know who he's talking about. Can somebody help me out here? Does anybody know who's argued this with Aron? Because I've never seen it. I just never have. I think he's making shit up, to be honest with you. And again, I don't think he's that honest when it comes to philosophy. So I'm going to say this is outright BS. I'll challenge him on this. I don't know any philosopher that has. Now, if there are some, I'll eat my words. I'll say, look, okay, there is a philosopher. I'm happy to change my position. Show me the evidence, right? Show me the evidence that there's a philosopher that said this. I will read it, and I will probably shout all over them too. Because I think that's ridiculous. Why can't these groups use those terms that way? Of course they can. Instead they say we must believe in not that we must take a position even though we don't want to. Well, no, again. Hang on, I got a hair out of play. Hair itching. No, I don't take a position. Right. So why would a philosopher argue you can't take a position? Agnosticism is not taking a position. Agnosticism is the position of not taking a position. It's suspending judgment. It's not having a belief either way. Most philosophers know this. I think probably every philosopher knows this. It's pretty ubiquitous. And adopt a belief that no gods exist, no matter how senseless that sounds. I don't know who the hell you're talking about, Aron. I just don't. Otherwise, they say we should be denied associating with atheists. I don't know why. And some unbelievers would have to call themselves lacktheist or some other lame label instead. That's okay. Nobody insists this. Aron, I think again, you're just willfully misleading people. The term lacktheist, coined by Ozzy, was not something that he said you have to use this usage, right? It was just meant to describe a group of people that held the position that atheism is just not belief, right? Now, again, I think I differ with Ozzy on this, and maybe the term has morphed a little bit. The way I use lacktheist is slightly pejorative. I admit that. It is somebody who holds that atheism is merely a lack of belief, and that's fine. But I remember Ozzy, maybe he can correct me if he's listening or later on. I thought I heard Ozzy say one time, this was years ago when maybe he was still formulating this, but he said, hey, yeah, non-believers are just lacktheists. We're all lacktheists. I'm a lacktheist. You're a lacktheist. I'm like, no, I'm not. And I don't think Ozzy is a lacktheist in the way I'm using the term. Now, he may have coined this term and he may use it this way. I use it differently. Why? Words can be used differently. I could take his neologism and use it a different way. Why not? As long as I'm telling you this is how I'm using it, just like Aron can. Aron can say, hey, look, I'm taking atheism, I'm using it this way. Okay, great. Nobody says you can't have stipulative type usages. But why? By the way, a wild Cheshire appeared.
Hello. I miscounted, so I'm a little bit late. What did I miss? Did we cover Aron, or did we cover Matt?
We covered Matt. Yeah, we already covered Matt. And how Matt had basically hand waved away my WASP argument without even addressing it by saying that it was, what was his? He said it was dishonest.
Because Steve wrote it.
Yeah, it was dishonest, and that it was semantics. I'm like, no, it's not.
Well, what about it is dishonest? Did he say what was it dishonest about it, or just that it was dishonest?
He said redefining theism as somebody who doesn't believe God doesn't exist.
What? How? In what way is that redefine? Okay. Okay. On the other hand, if you're redefining something, why is that inherently dishonest?
It's not. As long as you tell people I'm going to redefine it this way for my argument, but I'm not redefining anything. My argument is this is where he makes a mistake. My argument is not redefining theist. My argument is you have to allow theist to redefine it that way, or else it's special pleading. Do you see the nuance and the difference there? It's subtle. There's a distinct difference to be made there.
Is it subtle though? It seems pretty clear to me.
To you, okay. To you and I, it's not very subtle. It's pretty in your face. But I'm going to give people the benefit of doubt. They may not see the distinction to be made there. Maybe.
It's like not knowing the difference when somebody says something, like the difference between the word and the word because. You're wrong and you're an idiot. You're wrong because you're an idiot.
Right, exactly. That's what that's a good point when you talk about ad hominem, right? You know. By the way, let me include you in here so people can see you, because I got to use you.
Right.
There she is.
Hi.
I'm not gonna make her 16 by 9. I'll give her the whole 3 by 4, 4 by 3. So she's. That's why you're proportioned.
It's so people can see the little goblin.
Ah, it's cute.
Isn't he adorable? Look at his little goblin face doing little cute goblin
is that your offspring or significant other?
Yes.
I don't judge. Hey, whatever gets you by, man. At least he's almost your same height as you.
Right?
Right. All right, so you're gonna have to watch the outside because I don't have it shown in the internal. So.
Oh, that's fine.
All right,
I'm not too worried about it.
So,
I'm doing a goblin reads of this, so
I'll help you do. I was going to suggest that you do. Please do. So this will give you a little precursor to that. So he says, such antagonist. Again, he has not named these antagonists. I don't know who they are. Now, I'm going to say he might be referring to me, but I'm not a philosopher. So I don't, again, I'm assuming that he means actual real philosophers. But he might incorporate me because I talk about philosophy, but I don't know. I hate reading into things. What do you think, Chuch? When he says such antagonists, and he's talking about philosophers who say certain things, I don't think he's including me, although maybe it's a jab to me.
I don't know. That such antagonists towards what's confusing, right?
Well, because he
what
thinks
are they antagonistic towards?
He thinks that we're throwing in a wrench by trying to say that atheism is most commonly a belief, right? But he talks about philosophers that have said that insist that atheism is merely assuming. They insist that these atheist groups have to use the sensu stricto or sensu strictissimo definitions, which I don't know any philosopher that does. Yeah, that's what he said. When you read this, yes, that's what he says up here. You can read it later, but yeah.
Yeah, there's another question about that though. He says, what do you say? Antagonistic philosophers?
Yeah.
He can't be referring to you, or he's just wrong. You're not a philosopher.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. If he is, he's misusing the terms here because I'm not a philosopher. And again, I don't know why. He's jabbing at certain people here, but I don't know who he's jabbing at because I don't know any philosopher that holds to these positions. Not one.
I guess he is known for not getting the positions in this aspect correct, so it's possible he's just wrong.
Can the live chat tell me who they think he's talking about? And by the way, you can say it's me, but again, with the understanding that I'm not a philosopher, but do you think he's referring to even me in this category?
It doesn't sound like it. Usually if he's talking about you, he sounds a little bit more sassy.
That's true. I mean, I don't want to sound egotistical or people like, oh, look at Steve, he's a narcissist. People think he's talking about him. I don't want that. I'm like, I just want to know if he is or isn't. But whatever. But he says, cite Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy as one of the few sources to share the definition. Few sources. I have like 20 sources, Aron. Peer-reviewed papers. You have none. You cite Stanford, but you cherry pick, and this I'll go into what he cites, has nothing to do with anything. He says, even though it also says, it's important to recognize that the term atheism is polysemous, which, by the way, I've argued for how long, Cheshire?
Oh, God. The whole time? Whole time.
This is what gave me the most crap. Aron and Matt, and they were arguing it's not polysemous. They argued it only has one usage, one correct usage. He's doing it in this blog prescriptively.
Well, he also says that, like on Twitter, he was saying that this is the way it's always been used, as if it's the way it's always should be used or going to be used.
Yeah, but Josiah pointed out it was wrong. Josiah shot all over him from that.
Pointed out that he was wrong. He went on to continue saying that anyway, but that either way, he's still being prescriptive by this at that point.
Correct. Yeah. And he says, it has more than one related meaning, even in philosophy. Yes, this has been my argument for years, Aron. This is what people have been telling you. You're the one that says atheism has one correct meaning. You have told me this. You have said on air multiple times that any other meaning other than that has been influenced by theist.
Yeah, which is kind of bizarre. He kind of got into something like that, he was saying that that definition is something that's been manipulated and inferred or forced upon people by theists, as he's trying to force this definition on people who don't want to be. It's so strange.
He doesn't see it though, and then he goes on to say, thus, weak atheism as lack of belief is certainly a legitimate definition in the sense that it reports how a significant number of people use the term, which is called descriptivism. Aron, we've said this how many times? It is a legitimate definition. It describes how is being used, how a significant number of people use the term, which is descriptive. Then he says again, there's more than one correct definition of atheism. Aron has argued there's only one correct, and here he is citing Dr. Paul Draper, who wrote this, that saying there's been more than one definition, which has been my argument from day one. I'm the one that's been out there going, hey, this word's polysemous. There's more than one definition. Aron's going, no, it doesn't. There's only one correct definition. All the definitions are influenced by theist. And he's quoting. This is like Kyle's lawyer here, quoting stuff that just doesn't help his case. It's just bizarre.
It doesn't make any sense. I don't, and it's such, he's so attached to it, and I don't. Why are you so? I don't have. Are these not the people who say, "Hey, it's okay to be wrong, and if you're wrong, it's not a big deal to accept it, and if you get shown to be wrong, you want to be shown that you're wrong, so that way you are no longer wrong anymore." I'm pretty sure I've heard these people like expound upon this and talk about how it's such a good thing, but it seems like that's not something that they themselves are willing to follow through on.
Yeah, because they weren't worried about their position in the atheist hierarchy. Right, it's all about ego and saving face.
They wouldn't have to. You wouldn't have to if you didn't like choose to die on this hill and be an asshole about it and just have a discussion. It's not the position or changing your mind or correcting yourself that's going to lose you face. It's your behavior when something like this comes up. That's what's going to make you lose face. Yeah. That's what's going to show that you have a double standard. That's what's going to show whether or not you have any character in looks like I was incorrect. Like even now he could save a lot of face by sitting down and actually having a conversation with somebody that would be relevant, somebody that would be good. He tried that with
Ozzy, but he got killed. He got wrecked.
Well, and that's the thing, and just accept it then be like, you know what, I reevaluate it, and after my discussion with Ozzy, but don't have a contentious discussion, don't have a debate, just have a talk. That's what I like
to do. That's why when people come on, they go, okay, I kind of see your point now. Matter of fact, look, if somebody could show my WASP argument is inherently flawed logically, I would be the first one to go, okay, let me see if I can fix it. If not, I would just throw it away. I'd be like, hey, you know what? Was a really good argument, I thought, but it wasn't. It turned out it wasn't. Some flaws in it. Let's try something else. Okay, moving on. Right? I'm not going to die at a hill when somebody shows me the logic is wrong, but nobody's bothered to do that. You can't refute a logical argument with purely semantics. That's not how it works. All right. So then he says, that said, I have to point out two things the SEP got wrong. Okay, this is critical. The SEP got wrong. He's actually saying, this is a bold statement. Dr. Draper, who wrote a peer-reviewed paper, who's one of the co-editors in philosophy of religion for Stanford, right? He's a co-editor, philosophy of religion, got it wrong. Now, look, I have no problem with saying that an expert is wrong. I go out, look, I stood toe-to-toe with Dr. Kroon on physics. That I think that something was an error. He disagrees with me. I disagree with him, but I've asked other people, and they don't seem to think that I'm wrong. But it's a minor point. It's a minor point, right? But I don't say, look, you're an expert, therefore you can't be wrong. There might be some kind of detail that I think, like for example, I think Dr. Kroon and I were talking past each other. I think if we actually sat down and over it again, we would probably realize that we both agree.
Probably.
Yeah, it had to do with,
I've had discussions like that before.
Yeah, it had to do with local hidden variables and stuff like that. But you know, if I hear somebody that is a PhD like a creationist, can they make a mistake in science? Yeah. Do they? Yeah. Right. But it takes, you really have to like point out where the mistake is. I pointed out who wrote it was for not Answers in Genesis, but the other one, Creations Ministries International.
Well, you need to be clear, right?
Yeah, but they wrote something. It was Dr. Sarfati, I think it was, had wrote a piece on Creations Ministry International, and I point out a dishonest statement that he had about Hyoblitata, and basically he was confusing a great ape with a lesser ape, a gibbon, and it was dishonest. And it's something anybody can go look up, but we were talking, the human chromosome being different than all the other great apes, right? And that is something that needs to be accounted for, why we have 46 versus 48. And he wrote a blog on it, but he was misleading people. And it's like, people can point that out. Ruha points out all the time Dr. Tompkins' work is bogus, and he says stuff that's completely wrong. And Ruha's a layperson, so I don't mind him saying Dr. Draper is wrong, but he needs to demonstrate this. That's a bold claim, right?
Yeah, that's you would not just need to demonstrate it, because that would change that would make some changes in philosophy, some serious changes. So that would mean that this would be like, again, you're talking about somebody who has said multiple times that they're not that interested and are a layman deciding to expound upon how professionals in the field are wrong in this aspect, and being wrong in that aspect would change philosophy as we know it, or would at least change identification, or what means what in this case. It's like saying a flat earth saying the Coriolis effect doesn't work, therefore and then being right and saying, well, all those textbooks are wrong and Coriolis effect doesn't work the way it should. That would change everything if that was actually the case.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, that'd be awesome science, though.
Right, that would be amazing. So, like, if you are so convinced that you are correct, this is the exact same thing that Aron tells people like Hovind. If you are so convinced that you are correct, write your paper and have it peer reviewed. Where's your paper, Aron?
Well, it's funny.
Write the paper.
You don't have to actually. The thing is, not all of us can write papers, right? I don't have access to write a paper. He doesn't have access. But what you can do is write SCP, write to Dr. Draper. You can talk to an expert. I've never seen Aron talk to any expert on this. Not one. Ever. Not ever. But what he writes, he gets wrong. Chesh, he actually, this is his misunderstanding, right? Read what he writes. He said, if atheism, again, this is a conditional, it's called if.
If, yeah.
Which, by the way, it generally is. But if atheism is defined in terms of theism, and theism is the proposition that God exists and not the psychological condition of believing that there's a God, then it follows that atheism is not the absence of psychological condition of believing that God exists. That's a true statement. That is not wrong, Aron. If you're working with a propositional content, then we're not talking about the psychological content, right? Because psychological contents cannot be tested by argumentation. This is the whole point of what Dr. Draper was talking about. He wants to be able to test propositionals by argumentation, by saying God exists, God does not exist, as being propositional. So if you define atheism in terms of theism, theism is the position God exists, and you define atheism as the position that God does not exist, that is not psychological. Those are propositional. So if you define one propositionally, it follows the other one must be propositional because it's negation of the other. Dr. Draper was not wrong on this at all. I mean, it's bizarre how bad Aron butchered this.
If you're going to say that theism is the positive claim and atheism is the claim that they don't believe but aren't making the claim the other way, what is it called when you make the claim the other way if not atheism? Then
I asked the same question. No, they're like, oh, it's still atheism. But then I'm like, then why are you saying atheism is not the belief?
Then why would it be both? Why would you call atheism both things? Why is there not?
Because they lose nuance.
The better question, right? The better question on top of that is, why shouldn't we use different categories for those two things when they're clearly very different?
Yeah, I don't want to be lumped in with people like, no offense to them, but I don't want to be lumped in with somebody like Ozzy. Ozzy believes there's no gods. He thinks they're all bullshit. Okay, more power to him. He can justify and we don't have to have the same position. Ozzy doesn't come after me going, hey, Steve, you're an idiot for being agnostic. And I don't go, hey, Ozzy, you're an idiot for believing gods don't exist. None of it think that way, right?
Well, the problem is the people that are so attached to this argument are the people who say you're an idiot for thinking anything other than I do.
I literally have people who have said, well, anybody who claims there's no gods is an idiot. And they're atheists, self-proclaimed atheists that say that. I'm like, really? They're like, no atheist, has rationally, can say there's no gods. I'm like, that's actually an argument for agnosticism, really, but I don't even hold to that. I don't even hold to that. I think they're perfectly justified to believe there's no gods. It's bizarre to hear an atheist, self-proclaimed atheist say, well, an atheist has no position to claim there's no gods. That's what a theist would tell somebody. They're actually falling into a theist trap.
Yeah, there's too many problems in using this definition. And that's what we get into every time. We get into how this is an issue, and this is an issue, and this is an issue. And every time when Matt and Aron come back with something else, they never address the issue.
Never.
So we go back in a circle and say, well, I mean, that's fine, but this is still an issue, and this is still an issue, and this is still an issue. You've missed this point, and this point. This is the thing. You use whatever definitions you want. Just one, don't tell other people they're wrong. Don't tell people they have to use these definitions, and address the criticisms and problems with the definition when they come up. And if you can't, say, well, here's where you should go to actually have that discussion. We're not having that discussion here because I'm doing this very specific thing.
Yeah, it's perfectly
fine. But the thing is, if they did that, they get called out on bullshit. They totally get called out. Like Atheist Experience would be like, hey, maybe your show's kind of full of shit if you're gonna be taking this position and be like forever just, well, prove to me gods exist, and you've made God unprovable by your definition.
Yeah, and Dr. Draper points out if the question is, does God exist? It makes it these terms make it compatible with that question. Yes, you're a theist. No, you're an atheist, right? And it's perfectly fine to say I don't know. Somebody points out, you can say I don't know. Yes, but what I don't know it means there is ordinary doubt. It's like I don't know how to answer the question. I can't answer yes and I can't answer no. That's what I don't know means. It's an indirect answer. It's not a direct answer. But the question is, does God exist? If I say to Chesh, does God exist? There are only two direct answers. She says no. She's making the claim there are no gods. That is hard atheism or strong atheism, right? I don't want to be in the same position as her, no offense, but I mean, we don't hold the same position, right?
Right.
Can she justify it? Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced she can justify her belief, just like I can justify being an agnostic. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no right or wrong answers in that particular case. There's just different philosophical stances. And
now you've gotten into the problem of knowledge versus belief.
Well, here's the thing. They confuse it. When I say I don't know, it's not epistemic knowledge. It has nothing to do with knowledge at that point. I don't know is expressing a ordinary doubt, like different sense of the word. The word knowledge has different senses, right? I mean, there's explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. Like I can't impart to you how to play guitar. That knowledge is tacit knowledge. I can impart to you, but I what I'm doing is I'm relating it. I can't like stick you in my head subjectively, and you can experience me playing guitar, right? Even though I don't play very well. That knowledge is called tacit knowledge.
Somebody named James Henry in the chat just said, I don't know equals convince me. I don't think so necessarily.
I don't think so either. There's no onus for anybody to convince you. And why maybe I don't want to be convinced, or maybe I have no interest in it. I don't know and I don't care. I'm an apatheist, No,
yeah, that could be the case. I think I get what they're saying, but I also wouldn't be convinced that would necessarily follow. And then Icarus says, if rocks are atheists, then evolution is just a theory.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Pretty much.
So let me ask you guys this. See if you guys understand this. So what he's quoting from Dr. Draper, do you think Dr. Draper's right or wrong? Because he's saying that SCP is wrong. He's saying Dr. Draper's wrong. If you think Dr. Draper's right, press 1. If you think Dr. Draper's wrong, press 2. I'm kind of getting a straw poll. I'm kind of interested in here because this statement to me is not wrong. It's absolutely correct. It's explaining why we define things propositionally. Again, it's a conditional.
Yeah.
However, the original is still persistent, consistent, common standard definition cited by every one of the self-identifying atheist organizations. Okay, so what? We don't care how these organizations self-identify. They can self-identify. The self in that is very critical. How they self-identify is their choice, right? But what Aron's trying to do is identify other people. That's the problem. Is that theism is a psychological condition of believing? Well, again, that's not how it's. But if theism is the psychological condition of believing, then you cannot test for it by argumentation. I don't care that somebody has a belief God exists psychologically speaking, right? That okay. But when we're talking about philosophy, I want to know if they hold the proposition that God exists is true, and then why? Can they justify it? That's the whole point upon street epistemology. Anthony Manabosco does street epistemology. His street epistemology would not work if it wasn't for propositional theism, because he's trying to show that the justifications for theism are poor. Right? Does it make sense?
Makes sense.
You could say he's trying to show the justifications for the psychological belief, I guess, but I don't understand why he's so. I don't understand why Aron is so myopic about why he thinks theism has to be some kind of psychological thing. You can't test psychological conditions, right? We can test a proposition to see if it's true or not. And that's why we generally have propositions. So I don't know why he insists upon this. It makes no difference to me if somebody believes that God exists because it's a belief with status towards a proposition, or it's a psychological belief. Really, to me, it makes not much difference, but agnosticism is not propositional. There's a huge difference there, right?
So I'm actually interested in this James Harry account because
Sure.
the next thing that they've said is religion is a safe space for the stupid. Anywhere that does not anywhere that's more dogmatic and anywhere that says you have to do or believe in a certain way, or you need to or have to identify in this way, or we annex you or we treat you like a pariah, is a safe space for the stupid. Any place that values quantity over quality and is more interested in preaching rather than educating is a safe space for the stupid, which that is not exclusive to religion, because in the atheist communities, this is the same thing. In the quote unquote skeptic community, same fucking thing.
Absolutely.
I've had to leave skeptic groups because they treated me like shit for no reason.
You're a heretic. You're a heretic. You don't fall in exactly the way. Well, that was due to woke speak, but yeah, but still, it doesn't make much of a difference. The dogmatic religiosity of modern atheism, the new atheist, is just as bad as any theist. I don't notice any difference in their approach. They're exactly the same. But real quick,
I've also seen religious people debate, though. So I've seen there are some religions that are very much against people asking questions or speaking out. However,
sure.
there are more progressive ones that are far more open to things like that. You've got the more like culty-ish, creepy behavior of, let's say, the Scientology church versus even some sects of the Catholic Church that are far more willing to actually engage in conversation. A really good one, if you're interested in it, is it took place in a church, and it was Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Fry versus a cardinal and the woman whose name I can't remember.
Yeah, I know exactly. That was a was it I squared debate, or T squared, or I squared, or IQ squared. Yeah, that was brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's IQ. Yeah, I'll see if I can find it.
That was one of the best debates of all time, and that was the topic was, is the church force of good? Yeah, and that was brilliant because they actually changed people's minds in real time.
Yeah, it was a fantastic. So is the Catholic Church is a force for good in the world?
Yeah.
Here is the link
that
to
is
it.
probably one of my favorite debates of all time. That was a true debate. That was brilliantly done. I will give both Fry and Hitch huge props on that, how they handled that. So it's about the discussion, right? Oh, you muted yourself.
Oh, sorry. I said it was Archbishop John and Anne Widdecombe, and it was Stephen Fry and Christopher Hitchens. I highly, highly recommend it. It's very, very good. But in there you have an example of, I would probably say the bishop was doing a little bit more preaching rather than debating, but Anne Widdecombe was. She was debating. She addressed some of the points and went on the attack in a couple of places. So you can kind of see the dichotomy there, in that, of course, in debate there's rhetoric, but you do have people that are willing, and religious people who are willing to have those conversations. So,
yeah, and rhetoric is good, by the way. We want rhetoric in debate.
And to umbrella all religion doesn't allow for this, I don't know is necessarily fair. I think they're choosy about it. I think they cherry pick out who can and who shouldn't and who will and who won't. But I mean, you could see the same thing on the other side. There's a lot of people who are very much against Bill Nye debating Ken Ham because it brought Ken Ham way too much notoriety than he ever deserved. And also that Bill Nye is not a debater. So
let me address a couple things you did. Let me try this. A couple of things. Well, Perfect says agnosticism could never have been recognized as leading to a third recognized theological position if it was not propositional. There's an understanding of agnosticism that is propositional. Actually, agnosticism is psychological. Agnosticism is not propositional, because what would make sense for agnosticism to be true or false? It would there is no, in the domain of ontology, there's no proposition for
proposition.
Yeah. Now in the epistemic realm, there's a proposition for agnosticism, where that's about the knowability of gods. But we're not talking about epistemological domain. We're talking about the ontological domain. So in the ontological domain, there is no proposition to be had for agnosticism, right? And even Dr. Draper points this out, why we don't want agnosticism to be propositional. We want it to be a psychological position of not holding a belief either way, suspending judgment, right? And somebody said, Sphincter of Doom says, atheism is a proposition one believes the existence of gods. Agnosticism is the position of the extent that one can know whether gods exist. Can you have a citation for that when it comes to the ontological domain? Because that doesn't exist. In the ontological domain, that is untrue. We are not talking about epistemological domain. We're not talking about the knowability of gods. Strictly speaking, we're in the domain of discourse. When we're talking about the existence of God, Agnosticism has nothing to do with knowledge at all. Just all it is the agnosticism is the psychological state of being agnostic on the proposition of God existing, such that you don't believe God exists and you don't believe God does not exist. That is how it's used ubiquitously in everything that you ever read and read on agnosticism. In the domain of ontology.
Perfect also said the fact that Steve's understanding of agnosticism is not propositional is a strong indication that there is something wrong with Steve's understanding of it. It does not make sense under your understanding. So,
Dr. Draper has the same understanding. He makes it very clear that it's not propositional.
Well, that's fine. Then if Perfect could do me a favor and tell me what proposition is agnosticism holding?
Yeah, but what's the proposition for agnosticism in ontology?
Or he's essentially saying we're missing something. So,
because Dr. Draper makes
fine. Just tell us what it is, because it's not helpful if we don't know what it is that we're missing.
Yeah, Dr. Draper makes it very clear that because if you had agnosticism as a proposition, the agnostic would be somebody who holds to agnosticism, and not somebody who holds to suspending disbelief or belief. We don't want the agnostic to be somebody who holds agnosticism. We want the person who is agnostic to hold neither position, true or false, on the proposition. So it's a psychological state.
Well, they're saying that there's a propositional understanding of agnosticism. It's the one that Huxley presented.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about Huxley's. Huxley's was we've had this discussion. Huxley was a normative epistemic principle. We're not talking about Huxley's. We're talking about how it's used, understood in modernity when dealing with the ontological domain. I've sent my blog, Agnosticism 3 Ways, and make it very clear. The way Huxley used it, which was a normative epistemic principle, similar to scientific method, very, very similar more to logical positivism and evidentialism. We don't use it that way. That's archaic. It could be used in the epistemological domain as the knowability of gods, not using it that way. When it comes to ontology, agnosticism is held as a being agnostic on the proposition of God existing. So you don't have a position either way. So that is,
which means you can't be proposing something if you don't have a position. Right. Now, on the other hand, is it more? Now I know we're talking about Draper, but is there a time where it might be more prudent to use Huxley?
If that's a different argument, I don't think so.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm asking.
I think scientific method has come a long way. We don't need Huxley's method. But again, if you talk to like a guy named militant agnostic, he would disagree. He loves Huxley's approach. So I don't find it that great, but because I'm not an evidentialist. So
well, yeah, I guess that's like it's going to be hard to apply a position or an approach to your position that doesn't actually utilize your methodology.
Correct. Now again, that's just me, right? People could be an evidentialist. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, right? There's a flaw in how you're using it. Make any sense. Yeah, in that you cannot understand it to be propositional. No, I can outside the domain of ontology. How many times do I have to explain this? Inside perfect. Let me try to explain it to you again, because I know what you keep doing, and you've done this a million times, and I respect you. I really do. I know you know your shit, but you keep on removing it from the domain of ontology, and I don't understand why. In the ontological domain, what is the proposition of agnosticism? I maintain there is none. What do you think? If you
say that, and you please do not answer with how Huxley defined it, because that doesn't apply in this situation.
Yeah, that was a normative epistemic principle that he had. That's completely different.
Please, inside of this, the principles that we are discussing, explain to us what the proposition that atheism is putting forth.
Sphincter Doom, where is it that agnosticism is a position in metaphysics, not epistemology? I just explained it. Matter of fact, the paper I just read, Dr. Draper. Wow. Okay. So let me move on here. The other error. I mean, is like, wow. It's so funny. Aron sucks at philosophy, and yet he's so emboldened to think that Dr. Draper just makes these very cavalier mistakes because of his own misunderstandings. The other error is when SEP says that the philosophical redefinition, he thinks that they're redefining things.
Okay, hold on. Before we move on real quick, I do want to point out, before we continue reading, redefinition, Aron has already been corrected on this.
Multiple times.
shown multiple times, even just recently, as in like within the past week to week and a half, by Pheasant, who he agreed with, said, okay, I didn't know that, and now has written a blog ignoring that thing.
Didn't he also mention earlier that it was polysemous?
Sorry, not even ignoring that thing, actively saying the opposite of that thing and denying and ignoring that thing he was already corrected on that he agreed with.
By the way, the next great debate is going to be whether it's polysemous or polysemous.
Is SpongeBob an atheist?
Getting into fictionism is really awesome too, because somebody had, Stephen Hoyt had done a argument on the Great Debate community on Facebook. By the way, if you're on Facebook and you want to join the Great Debate community, we're on Facebook. Link is in the description. Go become a member. We have great discussions. But it's funny because the guy was trying to argue against Hoyt by premise one by saying, hey, you haven't proven point one, you're just assuming God exists. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. If I say Lois Lane believes Superman can fly, I'm not assuming either one that has actual ontology, right? But people use these type of arguments all the time. The guy didn't seem to understand you can use a proposition and not assume these are actually ontological things. You're making it if, right? These are if cases. If God exists, then this, right? So if we talk about Superman and Lois Lane, we're not saying they're actually real entities. But if I say Lois Lane believes Superman can fly, there's a fictionalism to be had there, right? You can say, yeah, it's true.
I'm getting a bit of a kick out of 321 because they're saying you both talk about this as if you were right. No one sucks at philosophy. Wrong. There are definitely people who suck at philosophy.
Bad.
I promise you.
Bad.
I'm not even saying that to say I suck at philosophy.
I'm
self-admitted suck at philosophy.
You've come a long way. You pick things up though.
Right, but we're talking about, we deal with people on a semi-regular basis that say, well, we're talking about religion, not philosophy.
Halando says, really bummed.
We're talking about the existence of God and beliefs, not philosophy.
That's true.
So I'm sorry, wait, what?
He says, I didn't know you were doing this show. I just joined. Sorry, trying to sort all this out, Looking forward to going back and listening. Don't want to jump in 110 minutes late. Sorry. But it's worth it. It's worth it, buddy.
I did.
So he says this. It has the added virtue of making atheism a direct answer to one of the most important metaphysical questions in philosophy of religion, namely, is there a God? What's wrong with that? I don't see anything wrong with that. There are only two possible direct answers to this question. Yes, which is theism, and no, which is atheism. Yes, that's what he says. Has the added virtue of making this to be the case. It's not, again, this is not prescribing it, Aron. And he says this is wrong. No, it's not wrong.
Where? Why?
What
How?
makes that wrong? It does have the added virtue. If you, what Draper's saying is, if you use these terms the way that I use them, or the way that you mostly find in philosophy, if you use these terms that way, then it has the added virtue of making it two direct answers to the question, is there a God? That is a if-then statement. That is absolutely true. It boggles my mind, dude.
I think I'm going to need somebody to come on with me on my Goblin Reads for this, because I might need somebody to hold my hand and make sure I don't wander off a cliff or decide to throw myself down some stairs.
You should get either Trolley Dave or Answers and Reason from their blog.
Why not both?
Or both.
Why not both?
But either one of them would be really good. Answers and Reason is actually, he's going to write it. He mentions me in his blogs a few times. And Trolley Dave has a master's degree in philosophy. But he Answers and Reason is going to do another blog on me, but he's going to take a whole different approach. And he's basically arguing that people come after me and they all make it personal when they never one of them have actually shown them I'm wrong. And he finds it to be very fascinating because he's been around for a while. And he and I actually disagreed in the beginning. And he came around to seeing my point of view because he actually researched this stuff. And now he's a staunch advocate of these types of usages. And he's like, why is it whenever I ask for evidence from people that are against Steve, none of them ever provide me anything that's any concrete? It's basically just ad hominem nonsense.
God's Auditor said, I think that you guys could do a lot more constructive stuff if you recognize how trivial this disagreement is. You guys have virtually the same position on everything concerning God except one word.
Yeah, I disagree. I think this is not trivial.
That's what I've been saying the whole time, in that all they have to do, like all that would need to be done, because keep in mind that Aron wrote a blog after being corrected. We're reviewing the blog.
Yeah.
We're reacting. This is reactionary, not proactive. We're not proactively going after anything anybody's said. On the other hand, though, I've said multiple times on multiple streams, on multiple platforms, that realistically, if they didn't want to address these things, all they would have to do is say on their own shows, hey, yeah, no, we're not dealing with that, instead of telling people they're wrong.
Right.
Telling people they're wrong, them being wrong isn't the thing that's a problem. That is trivial. Them telling other people they're wrong and not educating them where they should be educated is a problem.
Yep.
That's an active problem. But all they would need to do is point them in our direction. Hell, it doesn't even have to be us. Point them in somebody else's direction that is going to educate them in this field, so that way people aren't running around coming over to us and being like,
Yeah.
it's like, no.
Well, I mean, when I get people coming to me, hey, Steve, you know, atheism, you're straw manning atheism. Atheism is merely the belief of God does not, the lack of belief of God exists. And I have to start from the beginning with them every time, because all Aron and Matt would have to do is say, yes, Steve is correct as far as philosophical usages. We don't use those usages. And according to Steve's usages, he wouldn't be an atheist. Boom, I probably never mentioned either one of them again.
End of discussion. But the thing is, when
How
you got
difficult is
Matt
that?
running around, if you've got Matt going around saying Steve's a liar, and you've got Aron running around saying, hey, go listen to Nate Brody debunk Steve, which is wrong and complete bullshit, and like 7 different, let me count the ways, so that it's like this is not this is at the point where it's not acceptable. Like, it needs to be addressed, and that's the problem.
Right, so
but moving on, Perfect actually said,
yeah, hang on, let me give this to you. So Cheshire, see if you can point out the error, which we've already said 5 times. God. Perfect. Cheshire is going to tell you the error. I can guarantee you she knows the error.
I read half of it and I was like, oh no.
So let me read what Perfect says. The proposition of agnosticism can be phrased as, it is ethically wrong to develop beliefs in or claim to know things which cannot be justified scientifically to others. What is he just did what I told him 5 times not to do?
Talking about ontological versus, what was the other one?
Epistemic normative principle.
Thank you, yeah. But I also want to know...
He's talking about the epistemic normative principle of Huxley, which again is not related to ontology. I don't know how many times I can say it.
And on a side note, I'm sorry, excuse me, ethics? I got caught up on the word ethics being brought into this.
But this is where, you know, I would agree with Perfect if we're in a different domain.
Wait, are you talking about, if you're talking about ethics in someone's belief system, you're saying that there's thought crime?
Well,
at that point?
No.
Because you're saying if you believe something or you think something, you're ethically wrong.
Yeah, hang on. It goes to Clifford's principle. Clifford's principle is basically it's unethical to believe something without justification, even if the results means that something didn't happen. For example, I could state the exact position, but basically, if I believe that this actually happened to him too, if I believe that a boat isn't seaworthy and I let the boat cross the Atlantic and it makes it to the other side, I am morally and ethically responsible. Even though it didn't sink, I still have I am unethical. Although what happened in his case is the boat did sink.
Yeah, there's a really big problem there, right? There's a really big problem in talking about whether or not you're justified in believing one thing or the other, which is fine, but there's a big difference between a physical boat that is putting people in danger and a personal belief in a god or not a god.
No, I get that, but it still holds true. So basically, Clifford's principle says that it's wrong. Wrong is dealing with morals, right? It is wrong to believe upon insufficient evidence. Merely says that it's not wrong to believe in any case in which one's evidence is insufficient.
Maybe the word ethical is just throwing me off on that then, because that seems to me.
Yeah, that's what that's what evidentialism is about, though.
Yeah, I guess I just disagree.
So the way it's phrased is, it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything on insufficient evidence. That's Clifford's principle. Now, I reject that because I can actually show to a large degree that you can have insufficient evidence and still be morally justified due to pragmatic or prudential reasons, which Clifford doesn't take into account. This is why I deem myself a non-evidentialist or a moderate evidentialist, because you can have insufficient evidence and still be justified to hold a particular belief. I believe I hold that position, and I think most philosophers do. But anyways, I'll go back to Perfect again. Perfect's right as far as Huxley, right? He's not wrong. He's only wrong by saying, because we keep asking him, what is the ontological proposition of agnosticism? There isn't any, and we're talking about the ontological domain, not Huxley's domain. There's 3 domains to be had here: Huxley's normative epistemic principle, epistemological domain of nobility of gods, and the ontological or existential plane of God. Why do you think I made the video Agnosticism 3 Ways? For that very reason. By the way, if you haven't watched it, go check it out. Go find it on my channel, Agnosticism 3 Ways. All right, so can we move it on? First of all, a detriment is not a virtue. What's the detriment here, Chesh?
Fino.
It's virtue. It's virtue because it makes it very simple. We want
to being corrected over and over again and not adjusting your position based on new information. Is that the detriment?
It gets worse. This is where he's going off the rails here. Second, more importantly, so wait, this is more. Check it out, Chesh. This is more important than the question: is there a God? More importantly, the metaphysical question was never, is there a God? That's always been the great debate question, by the way. That's always been the great debate question. Is there a God? That's what was known as the great debate.
Kind of around for a really long time.
The question is a topic of idle philosophical pontification of no real consequence. Whether God exists or not is irrelevant. Oh, now he's going to defer to apatheism? I think that's a pretty relevant question. Does God exist? Now, I say I'm an apatheist when it comes to the question only in discourse, because I don't think these arguments are ever going to get anywhere to show anybody whether God exists or not. But if somebody says, hey, Steve, would you like to know if God exists or not? Yes, I think it's a very important question to know. So I only use apatheistic in a very small, nuanced way, because when it comes to these discussions...
At the end of the day, I would like to know, but I also don't think it's going to be something that's knowable.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't sit there and go, hey...
Would it be nice?
Correct.
Sure.
Exactly. It changes nothing either way. It doesn't. If God existed, it wouldn't change anything. I think it would. I mean, Aron would have to admit that he was completely wrong, if God existed. All that matters is the question of whether we believe there's a God. All right, we're going to run out of time here, so we're going to have to do a part 2 on this, because I don't want to go more than 2 hours, because we could spend 5 hours on this. But let me leave with this. Let me just kind of end it with this a little bit. Cheshire, I'm going to ask you what you think is a more important question, and I'm going to demonstrate how fucking dumb Aron sounds right here. And I'm sorry, I don't know how else to put it. Aron, you sound like an idiot. This is straight up me telling you, as somebody who I used to consider a friend. I wish we still could be friends. You've always said to me, Steve, you think I'm saying something stupid, you think I'm wrong, tell me. I'm telling you, this whole blog is bullshit, and you are fundamentally an idiot by thinking rocks are idiots, and 2, saying what you just said here. And let me explain why. Cheshire, I'm a genie. I will grant you one thing, one answer to your question. You can either ask me, does God exist? Or you can ask me, do I believe God exists or not?
What?
There you go.
How do I not already know the second answer?
But which was a more important question? He's literally saying we believe there's a God or not is a more important question than is there a God? So if you had those 2 questions, is there a God? You can ask the magic genie. I'm the magic genie. You can ask me, is there a God? Or you can ask me if I believe there's a God. Which one do you think is a more important question to ask?
It's important to know if the genie believes in a God.
Anybody.
Why the fuck do I? Yeah, that's what
Anybody.
I mean. It's the question.
Doesn't matter.
Why do I is the genie in this, right?
Yeah, sure. Or anybody.
Why the fuck do I care if the genie believes in a God or not? Especially if I don't know the God is real. So the second question is completely irrelevant if you don't know the answer to the first one.
Well, it's not. I wouldn't go so. It's not irrelevant. I mean, I like to know what people's beliefs are. But
in this case, like, why do I care if the genie believes or not in a God if I can find out whether or not there actually is a God? Like, in comparison,
right.
these things make no sense.
Right. Now, sure. I mean, we have principle of charity. If Cheshire says, like she says, I believe there's no God. That's what she says. I have principle of charity. I believe that's her actual position, right? The cooperative principle. She's an honest interlocutor. She has no reason to deceive me on that. I wouldn't want to know for certain if whether she believed that or not. I don't care. It's not matter. It makes no difference to me whether I'm certain of it. I'm reasonably certain enough to say, yeah, that's her belief. Why would she tell me otherwise?
Yeah, one is somebody's knowledge, like one is somebody's belief, and one is like hard knowledge of something. So the thing is that if the genie grants me the first wish, so I now know whether or not God exists, and then I ask the genie what they believe, I don't have to ask the genie, I can tell them, and then the genie knows that I know. So
that's true too, because he knows God will exist at that point or doesn't, right? He would know if he relays you the information, he has to know, right?
Well, no, it depends on how magic works. If it's magic, then he might not know.
That's good. Okay, fair enough.
Right. So, but the genie knows that you know the answer.
Right.
So if I go to the genie and I get the first one granted, he could think I'm lying, but I mean, he's genie.
But here's the thing: what's more? Aron's literally saying that the more important question is about what we believe, and I'm like, no, the more important question is God. Is there a God? That's the more important question. Now, our beliefs are in relationship to that question, right? That the propositions in relationship.
Right. So
in fact, I remember, and I got to find it somewhere because I got to fix it a little bit. But you remember I made a flow chart of this, and I started with the question, "Does God exist?" And the reason why I started with that question is because everything flows from there, right? Beliefs flow from there. And Matt Dillahunty argued the same thing. He said Steve's flow chart is wrong because the question isn't, is there a God or does God exist? It is about, do we believe God exists or not? It's propositional. He's just starting with the proposition about believing God exists or not. No, the question is there a God? Does God exist? That's the fundamental question. Then we ask you yes or no, which is direct answers. And you can say, yes, there's a God. No, there's not a God. You're an atheist, or I don't have a position on either way, which is I don't know. Agnostic. Those are the three main epistemic dispositions, right? Makes it very simple. So, the question, is there a God, is a hell of a more important than a question about whether we believe there's a God or not. I mean, Aron, you don't look to yourself before you write this stuff, I think. But anyways, let's kind of ask the audience here. Do you guys agree that that him saying that all that matters is the question of whether we believe is a God or not is just stupid? I mean, that it flows from if there's God, and plus it makes it even worse from because, okay, Cheshire, let me ask you another question as a genie, even though I'm not going to grant you anything. He wants to know we believe there's a God. Why is it not as important to say we believe there's not a God? I would like to know if you believe there's a God, or I'd like to know if you believe there's not a God. I think those are important questions.
Definitely, realistically, they're important questions because that's all we can know is what each other believe and why. Because we can't, it's hard to imagine being able to know for a fact whether a God does exist because of the way God is defined and what God actually means. So knowing that you're not really going to be able to tell and know for a fact 100% the same way you might know if you bite into an apple, you're going to get apple for the majority of the time. There's not really a whole lot of there's a value in knowing that, but the value is wrapped up in the discussion of why somebody might believe what they do believe.
Yeah, I mean, for the same reason why we want to know why theists believe that they believe, I want to know why an atheist would believe there's no gods. I mean, it's just. I'm curious.
Right. You can't have that belief system without the question of whether or not there is a God.
Correct.
Why would you have a belief system about something that isn't relevant? That doesn't make any. Do you believe how many gumballs? Who gives a shit? They're gumballs. Nobody cares. But God, people care about. People care about that question, which is why it's an important question. And you cannot have this belief conversation without this question. Thus, in the whether or not it's important, this takes priority because without it, this doesn't exist.
Yeah, I agree. And Dawes Auditor says, Cheshire, well, either way, you have my opinion on it, so I'm going to do what I think you guys should do and dip out of the argument as I feel as it isn't important as other arguments. Yeah, I love you, God's Auditor, but I fully disagree. I think this is the crux of critical thinking. I think that when we allow somebody like Aron and Matt Dillahunty to get away with using fallacies and not point them out, we are no different than the people that we criticize on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I don't have much of an issue with the actual, like, my main reason for discussing this stuff has absolutely nothing to do with the argument itself. It has to do with the behavior of the people engaging in the discussion and the argument.
Agreed.
You could argue this
I like
shit
both,
until
but
the
yeah.
cops come home. You can argue. Yeah, I'm just saying my priorities.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fun discussion to have, but that's the thing, is it should be a fun discussion. People shouldn't be calling each other liars over it. People shouldn't be fucking like throwing each other under the bus. People shouldn't be signal boosting racist fucking assholes over this stupid fucking argument. People should fucking know better, and people should match their own standards. That's what matters to me. Consistency. If you're going to say that you're going to correct yourself, or that other people should correct themselves and say that these people are liars because they didn't correct themselves after they've been shown to be wrong over and over again, then that person not correcting themselves over and over again when they've been told is the liar by that fucking standard. And this should not be happening. This should not be an issue. The atheist experience shouldn't be telling people they're wrong and prescribing what people should identify themselves as. What they should be doing is giving people the information, or telling people where to find the information, so that people can educate themselves and learn and actually think about what it is that they want, instead of creating a whole nother dogmatic bullshit fucking container.
Religiosity.
Like, let's get as many fucking people in here as we can and not teach them a damn fucking thing, so they're just about as useful as the average churchgoer.
I couldn't find fault with anything you just said.
Better than anybody else if you're doing the same fucking bullshit.
I 1000% agree with that. Bullinator says, why someone believes what they do is more important to me than what they believe their justifications are a paramount of interest. Yeah, I think that's why, again, I agree that I'd like to know the justifications, right? Why do you believe a certain thing? Like somebody says, like I watched the straight epistemology video. It's one of my favorite ones because it's actually worked in this particular case a little bit. And I do have some objections to it. I know Steve Hoyt has some objections to it, but they asked the girl, well, why does, like, you believe rocks have these certain imbued properties, like hematite is good for the blood, and they said, well, what makes it this way? What prescriptively makes it this way? Is somebody just told you this, or do you have an actual reason to believe that hematite is good for the blood, other than somebody just saying, hey, this particular rock, we're going to say it's good for the blood? What is the actual reasoning for? What's your justification? What makes it in the universe makes it this way? Is there a law? Is there a science? What makes it this way? Is it magic? She didn't have an explanation about why it was good for the blood. Well, I just was told this. I've read it in books.
I don't care whether or not you're wrong, or correct, or whether we agree. What I care about is your behavior in that disagreement, or how you react when you are shown to be wrong. If you have a high standard of how people should behave and correct themselves, and you don't meet that standard, hell, you don't even try to meet that standard, I'm going to have an issue with you telling other people that they should be meeting those standards.
Yeah, and I know people are going to leave comments on here, and by the way, I'm going to bring this to a close.
Good.
But like I said, if you come over and you're just going to bash, don't bother. Your comment's going to go away. If you have an actual argument, that's fine. But I can tell you right now, from my experience, not one person has actually given any decent form of argumentation. All they say is the same nonsense over and over again. Steve, you're playing semantics. No, I'm not. This is logic. Or worse, agnosticism deals with knowledge. No, we're not talking about knowledge. We're talking about ontology. Stick with the domain. If you're not in the domain, I'm just going to refer you back to the video and say, please watch the video again. We're talking about ontology. We're talking about the existence of God. I'm going to say it very clear for those in the back. Agnosticism is the state of being agnostic on a proposition, of not believing one way or the other, not believing it's true, not believing it's false. And when it comes to the existence of God, which is ontology, it is the position that you do not believe God exists, and you do not believe God does not exist. That is agnosticism, period. When it comes to ontology, it's, at least as far as philosophy, right? If you want to use it in some other different way, in some other domain, whatever. But in philosophy, when it comes to ontology, that's how it's used ubiquitously. Never seen it used any other way.
You don't use geology when you're talking about biology.
Yeah.
You don't use biology if you're talking about evolution and somebody brings up abiogenesis. Well, you're talking about different things. So if you jump that, this is the same thing. It's the same thing. So if you jump from one to the other, you're no longer talking about the same thing. And at this point, you know for a fact that you're not talking about the same thing, and you've been it's been explained to you, and you've been told, and you've been corrected. So by our own standards, if you try and do it again, you're a liar. Good luck. Have fun.
I'll give you a perfect example before we wrap it up. Stephen Bauman had a video the other day, and it's really good. He's a really good geologist. And I watched some of his videos because I don't know much about geology, so I wanted to learn a little bit. And he says in geology, sand is considered rock. Sand is a rock. Okay, is a rock. Yeah, it's not rock particulates. It's not made of rocks.
Made up of rocks.
It is a rock.
Considered a rock.
Right. So if you have a jar full of sand, you have a rock in that sand. And by the way, same thing in science when it comes to metals. I don't know if you know this, but in astronomy, a metal is anything other than hydrogen or helium. That's it. And a metal is anything other than hydrogen and helium for stars to create. That's what they consider to be a metal. Yeah, we're not talking about like chemistry. Chemistry is completely different. But
exactly. See the jump?
Right. So these words have usages in different types of domains. So when I say sand is a rock, it may not make sense if I'm trying to explain it in a different domain other than geology, right? Because it'd be like, well, it's silicon dioxide, it's consisting of different aggregate of different materials. Well, that's what a rock is actually an aggregate of one or more materials. Yeah, so it's again, you have to stick within the topic of discourse that we're talking about. And
theory and faith both apply in this case.
Halando says, is your position that the ACA's definitions are not different, in fact wrong? No, they're not wrong. There's no right or wrong. Yeah, metallicity. Yeah, exactly. Sean has it right. Metallicity is anything other than hydrogen and helium in a star, right? So metallicity, when we say how much metal is in a star, how much metallicity is in a star, if it's population 1, 2, or 3, then we're asking, is there carbon, nitrogen, oxygen? Is there something other than hydrogen and helium to see if it's an older population 1 star or a newer population 3 star? Which by the way, I don't think it's been. Have we ever seen a population 3 star? I don't think so. I think we only have population 1 and 2. Now, 1 is actually older, but no, wait. Population 1 is newer stars. Population 3 is the oldest. Yeah. Is that right?
Mike is saying. Mike says, I heard Atheist EXP explicitly give the caveat of here's what we mean when we say atheist, or here's how we use it, and then say things. No, not quote. This is the only definition of atheism. Don't straw man. Please.
That's exactly what they do. This is exactly what Aron literally is in his blog has said there's only one correct definition. He has multiple times there's only one correct definition. Matt Dillahunty has said numerous times, if you are not atheist, you are an atheist. He has actually said this. You don't say otherwise, man. I've listened to these guys for years.
Well, it's a matter of trying to have your cake and eat it too. If you say, hey, we use the definition this way, and then you go on to have a conversation when somebody says, but in this case, this, and they say, no, it's this, wrong. What they should be saying is, that's not how we're using it here, though, so let's stay on topic.
Yeah, metallic hydrogen, from what I understand, is a state of hydrogen, right? But metallicity.
And then when somebody tells you,
other elements.
And then when somebody tells you, well, if you use it that way, then you're taking all of this shit.
Matt Dillahunty has said Steve's the bitch of language, and he's an atheist. They've actually, I mean, if you actually think that Matt, by the way, this is why I say they have hypocrisy. Matt will sit there and say, yeah, we use it this way, but it's not the only definition. But Steve is not Steve is an atheist because because anybody who's not a I mean, he just did it. Matt just did it last week. I mean, if you've heard the rest of the recording, there was a part of it somebody that I was listening to. I think it was last week, when Matt actually said, "Either you're a theist or not a theist. I mean, either you're a theist or an atheist." He's said this multiple times.
I would like to point out that there is a problem when you've got the president of a company having this idea about the philosophy that is different than the philosophy of the company, or the group, or the whatever. But let me
ask there, Robert. Let me ask Matt Cortez. Have you not heard? Because I will find a few, and as more than once, Matt has said. In fact, he said it on Twitter, not Twitter. I mean on Twitch, that Steve's an atheist because Steve doesn't believe. That is prescriptive. He also has said you are either a theist or you're an atheist. That is, he has said this numerous times on the Atheist Experience. I actually have a blog where he actually has a quote from this. So if you haven't heard him say this, either you don't watch the show. He says you also can refer to as if you want. Yes, but that's not my point, Mike. He's also said that you are a theist or you're an atheist. There's no middle ground there. He has said this. Do you agree? If you agree, then what are you arguing about, right, bud? This is what we're arguing against. Him saying that is wrong, right?
I recommend checking out these 2 videos that I'm linking in the chat.
Which one's that
if
one?
you're interested. That's the one we just did on Aron, and the other one is the one from April
that was good.
about Dillahunty. So if you're curious, now keep in mind these don't involve Steve. So if you're upset about the Steve shit,
I wasn't involved with I was busy doing
this.
Yeah.
I did this entirely on my own. I did use Steve's blog because Matt made claims about what Steve believed, so I went to go check Steve's blog to see what he believed. So I do recommend going and checking those out. And if that was the case, if you are correct, and that was the case, why would they not clarify that instead of saying that Steve is wrong all of the time?
Correct. Yeah, well, all they have to do is this. Matt, Dillahunty, and Aron would only have to say, look, the way we use these terms, Steve's an atheist, but he doesn't label himself that way. That's his prerogative because he doesn't belong to organizations. Why should we force our labels on him? But according to his usages and the way it's normally understood in philosophy, he's not an atheist. But if you want to be, if you want to be in our organization, we're going to accept anybody who doesn't believe as an atheist. But Steve's not in our organization, so why should we prescribe our usages to him? If they were to say something like that, there'd be no problem. No problem whatsoever. But they don't.
The problem only comes is that they're telling other people that they're wrong or they're incorrect when they are not wrong, right, and they're not incorrect, and misleading people. That's the problem. That's the issue. If they didn't do those things, they can use the word however the fuck they want. Just don't tell other people that it's the only way or it's the original way or it's the real way to use the word when it's not.
Aron in his blog has done this more than once. When he wrote the blog on me called, about something about Mr. Agnostic, he made it very clear there's only one correct definition, and that is lack of belief. That was his words. His words.
Anyway, if you guys are tired of this discussion, come to that time of the month tonight. We're talking about parenting. It's going to be really funny.
Yeah. God's Otter says, why don't you directly address then with what you just said? Why don't you directly address them with what you just said?
We have.
Like I haven't. I've written how many
times.
blogs on it? How many times have I engaged with Aron until he blocked me and Matt blocks me? If they block me, I'm not going to go out. I'm not going to. Why would I? Dude, once somebody blocks me, I'm not going to.
I tried to talk to Aron about this week or last week or whenever he decided to do that on Twitter. I'm still not blocked, but he still doesn't address the point.
Yeah, I mean, he did the same to Desire.
If you like, just look at the fucking video. Look at the video. The first video I posted. He doesn't address it.
Yeah, well, Mike, like I said, go ask Matt if I'm allowed to use my usages that philosophy uses. He says they're dishonest. He says that I'm just misleading people. That he says that I'm language's bitch. These are his words, man. I'm language's bitch because in language usage takes priority, and therefore, if he uses it as a lack of belief, then I am an atheist, and if I don't like it, I can fuck off. Those are his words, basically.
What he said is that language is our bitch, and so therefore so is Steve McRae.
Right, that's his words. Yeah. Language is our bitch, and therefore so is Steve. I mean, come on, dude. We actually listen to what they say, okay? And I'd be fine to have a discussion with Aron or Matt. That's never going to happen. I'm never going to ask for one. But they won't. Matt just hand waves everything away. Steve's argument is semantic. Steve's argument is dishonest. Well, how come no philosopher has said that? How come they all keep telling Matt, no, Steve's argument is good? And why have I keep offering, if you know a philosopher that disagrees with me, if you know a philosopher thinks Matt and Aron is right, why don't you introduce me to them? Why don't you give me a name?
Well, that's the thing. If Aron didn't want to have the conversation, which he clearly, he doesn't want to have the conversation with Steve, obviously. He's fine with telling other people that what they should believe, but he's not willing to have the conversation with somebody who might actually be capable of having the conversation. All he would need to do is send someone our way. So if he's like, hey, this person is correct and isn't a dishonest piece of shit that isn't a philosopher, probably, that maybe you should send the philosopher our way, send the professional that you're listening to, that you say there's so many of, send them our way, and we'll talk to those people.
Shift says $2. No consensus in philosophy and atheism. I've never claimed there was. What I've claimed was there's normative usages. Right. Because philosophy isn't science. Okay, we don't deal with consensus. Philosophy deals with positions, right? So the normative usage of atheism is the belief God does not exist. That's in 99.9% of papers. I mean, it's a guesstimate. I have never found a paper that uses it different. I assume there might be one, but I've read I've read a shit ton of papers on these things, and even the ones by Michael Martin, even the ones by Anthony Flew, even the ones by Stephen Bullivant, who's a theist, they don't even say anything against that. They advocate that they want atheism to be held in the normative case, but Flew actually says atheism is the belief that God does not exist, but I want it to be held in the negative case, is basically what he says, paraphrased. So we're not talking about consensus, we're talking about normativity. Right, Shift? Does that make sense? So in philosophy, almost every paper you're going to go read, almost every book you're going to read about atheism from an academic position, atheism is talked about as the belief God does not exist. If you see the word atheist in Burgess Jackson's paper, P.K. Moser's papers, LLC Smart's papers.
Right. It's unless otherwise specified. Paper, but however, how often does that happen, for one? And for two, there are papers written to try and change the normative definition that have been lampooned
rejected
so far
big time
within that field.
That was the whole point of experts. Yeah, that was the whole point of Flew's paper. That was the whole point of Flew's paper in 1972, Presumption of Atheism. He wanted changed. He was like, yes, in philosophy, it is commonly most commonly understood.
There is no normative usage. Have you read the 140,000 papers at Steve? How do you know what is normative?
Ever taken a sample size?
There is no normative usage of the word theory
ever taken a sample size?
Even in science,
Chess, have you read all the papers on evolution?
You have to read every paper on evolution to know whether or not it's a theory.
Yeah, no. Hey, Chess.
including the ones written by religious groups that say it's a guess.
Chess. Have you read all the papers on evolution that it's a changeable Higgs frequency normatively? I mean, have you read all those? Yes, there's a citation for those claims. There is the Oxford Handbook of Atheism, which says it's the most popular in philosophy. It also, you can find it in Cambridge, which says it's the most standard usage. So those Oxford and Cambridge has two citations for you. And all you have to do is give me one for one. How about this, Shift? I'll challenge you. You give me a paper that uses it in the weak case, and I'll give you a paper that uses it in the strong case. Let's do exhaust citations first. That's fair, right?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Right?
Citation for the evidence? What are you talking about?
Oxford and Cambridge says it's standard, and it's the most common used in philosophy. Both of them say that. So again, Shift. Give me, if you want to demonstrate that I'm wrong. By the way, you could do what's called a sample size. I have all these papers that show from my usage. How many papers do you have that show that yours, Shift? Please answer this question.
Sorry, that was just really funny.
So
have you read all the science?
So we're gonna end it on this. So let's see what paper he gives us. Give us the name of the paper, because like I said, I've read a lot. What paper does you have that uses atheism in the negative case and not advocates for it? I'm not talking about Bullivant, Martin.
I have a question. If I was to say, well, we're waiting because we have to wait. If I were to say that theory has a normative definition and I say, oh, this many papers uses it, do I have to necessarily stick with scientific papers that say it? Or am I allowed to use game theory every time they use the word theory? Or am I allowed to jump to musical theory to be like, this is a different kind of theory and they use it professionally in that field? Does that count?
Oxford says lack of belief normative. What are you referring to? Because I have Oxford right here. I can bring it right up.
Look at Steve's looking all sassy and cocky right now. He's just like, come at me, bitch.
I got this stuff I got this stuff on demand, man. What are you kidding? So let's you quote, show me the quote and what you're referring to, because I got the Oxford Handbook of Atheism right here. There you go.
Yeah, just copy and paste what it actually said, like the whole what it says. I do know that somebody made a great point to Aron when Aron said he tweeted out his blog and said, I trust I won't have to explain this again. And then somebody named Ian Harrison said, and you're still cherry picking the parts of the definition you put.
Exactly.
The definition starts with a person.
A person, yeah. You know, it's a much better argument, by the way. Like I said, I think that he makes a critical mistake by going down that route rather than just just limiting it to a person, because there's a different argument to be had there. All right, so here's the Oxford Handbook of Atheism. Let me transition it. All right, so it says right here very clearly. Can you read that?
I can't see it. I have to see it on the
yes. So it says belief that there is no God or gods, arguably the most common current usage.
So belief that there is no gods.
Yeah. And
hell, when I was reviewing some of the tweets that were made, Aron used a source that said the belief that there are no gods, or a belief or a lack of belief, and then he said, "See, it's lack of belief." And it's like earlier he was saying that belief and lack of belief were the same thing, and I'm like, if they were the same thing, why are you sourcing a definition that says this or this as if they're different things?
Yeah.
A belief that there is no gods, arguably the most popular current usage.
And Cambridge confers by says it's a standard usage.
Yeah. Belief that there is no gods. I'm not sure what Schiff is saying, because he said yes in all capitals. This doesn't say what the thing you said. I'm so confused.
Yeah, I'm trying to find my other. Where's my Cambridge one? I only have the dictionary. I hate when I kind of figure out when I called it.
Oh. Sphincter of Doom said, "Did you guys just deny Rock's personhood? Way to be geophobic."
Harsh. Yes, we did.
Now we're all geophobists. What is favored in modern scholarship, dude? You're changing what you're okay.
Yeah, he's just C-line at this point.
Poe's law.
Yeah.
I invoke Poe's law.
Yeah, I mean, I just got too many citations to really kind of show you. But I mean, it's just like here, The Nature of Atheism. This is a paper by Corrett. This says, so the atheist accepts that it is not the case that God exists. Right? Just using it as atheism is the way I use it, right?
I don't think what thinking is.
Let me see if I can this way. I usually have all these things ready to go, so I wasn't kind of expecting this, right?
No, we were supposed to end it on that.
Yeah.
Click clack shiny math rocks needs more, all the more.
Let me just show you this one thing real quick.
I'm getting the feeling this person doesn't understand how dictionaries work, because they just said, please read the first definition for 2.
We're not talking about definitions. Again, that's argumentum ad dictionarium. All right, so let me show you this one. Here's a paper. Again, normative usages, right? Because we're talking about normative usages. Here's a paper that actually says atheists accept that God does not exist. I mean, this is how it's understood. Right? So how many papers do you have, Schiff? So one last time, please tell me. I'm not interested in dictionary fallacy. How many papers do you have? Give me a number and a paper that uses it differently.
This is getting super pedantic really quickly. Yeah. That this is why we have this discussion, right? Because this is why what Aron and Matt are doing is a problem. This is exactly why what they're doing is a problem. They're claiming something as the only definition, and so somebody comes over here to be like, hey, this is the definition. And then when we show them it's another definition, they go, please read the first one. It doesn't matter about the first one.
Yeah, the first one doesn't matter. Yeah, the first one explains that you could use as lack of belief. But the argument was, what's the most popular in philosophy? That was the argument. Oxford says, currently the most popular. Boom. That was the argument. Nobody's arguing that the other usage doesn't exist. So again, how many papers do you have? You get one last shot, then I'm going to time you out and end this, because I just will play games.
Yeah.
You give me a number shift. How many papers, peer review papers, do you have that use it in the negative case? I want people to see this firsthand. How dishonest. This is why we continually do this, because people are being dishonest.
Well, here's the thing. This is a Steve debacle. Yes, it is. Here's the thing. Nobody is saying that the other definition isn't used or doesn't exist. Right. Obviously, Aron uses it, therefore it exists. That's all you need. You're going to argue that one is the more common definition, and we immediately you cite Oxford. We pull up Oxford, and it says this other definition is the most commonly currently used. It doesn't mean the other one doesn't exist.
All right, he has 10 papers. All right, give me the first name of your paper. Which paper are you referring to? He has 10
Makes
papers
no
that use
sense.
it in the weak case. That's interesting.
Why not read it?
10.
Just read it because that's not what we're talking about. Why would you like? What is this? What is life? I don't understand what's happening.
What is lamp? What is chair?
irrelevant.
All right, so what paper uses it? I'm not, and again, we're not talking about papers that want to change it like Flew, Martin, or Bullivant. What paper actually uses it normatively
Yeah,
in the negative, like I just showed you?
Right.
Or-
You're talking about who uses it that way, not argues that it could be used or
Right.
should be used that way, because that doesn't count because they're not using the definition that way. They're saying the definition should change.
Yeah.
That's a different subject of conversation.
So what's the name of the paper? Your first paper shift. Flew Anthony, 1972. And we're done. And you get a hide on the channel because we've explained that a million freaking times.
I think you should. I still
Wow,
think
that's
you should have hit them
sea-lining.
because it deletes all their messages, man. Now when people watch this later, they're going to be really confused.
No, it's going to come back. I didn't hide them. I just timed them out. They'll come back.
You hid them.
No, I didn't.
It says hidden.
No, I didn't.
It shows
Oh,
hidden.
did I? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hide you.
Press the wrong
Oh,
button, Steve.
my bad. Wrong button. No, you're just going to time out. No, I'm not going to. I'm just going to hide you on the channel.
But all their messages are deleted. No. And then you hit him again.
Well, I can view and delete.
Steve, you fucked it up.
Did I hate this. I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't mean
Steve,
to.
you fucked it up.
Why is it double clicking this?
I don't know. So you're not being patient enough.
No, it's double clicking. Unhide. Put user. There we go. All right, now he's in a timeout.
You deleted them. You fucked it up, Steve. Should just left it alone.
Whatever. I suck. All right, but anyway, at least we read it out. But he's not. He's just got a timeout, so he's not hidden permanently. So he can come back and try again. But let me read something from Flew because this is how dishonest he is. This is from Anthony Flew's 1972 paper, which, by the way, we have already explained a million times. But he says this quote. Ready for this, Chesh? Quote. Whereas nowadays, the usual meaning of atheist in English is someone who asserts that there is no such being as God. I want the word to be understood positively, not positively, but negatively. Let me read that again for you there, Shift. Whereas nowadays, the usual meaning of atheism in English is, quote, someone who asserts that there is no such being as God. Fuck you. Give me a super chat, bitch. And say you're sorry.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
So
I
essentially,
timed it out.
is what you're telling me right now is their citation of the usage of a word is the citation that they use actually says the opposite of what they're trying to claim.
Yes, it's a big oof.
Yay!
Big oof.
NC Pure 45 says at Chesh, more importantly, minced and chicken pie or steak and cheese. Ooh, mince and cheese.
It's mince and cheese. I already answered. Yeah, that's a given. I already answered that question. Yeah. So do you see the big oof here, people? Thank you very much. This is why we actually do these stuff, because people like that come along and they clearly didn't understand Anthony Flew's paper. And how many times have I mentioned Anthony Flew's paper? Because why? I've read it numerous times. I actually take notes on it for that very reason, because Anthony Flew even admitted atheism is normally understood as the belief God does not exist. Thank you very much. We'll be here all night. Actually, what do you got tonight? And then you said you're going to do a goblin read on this. When are you doing your goblin read?
I don't know. I haven't decided on when I'm going to do the goblin read. Maybe on Tuesday. It depends on when people are available, because I really feel like I'm going to need somebody to save me from myself for this one. So, because I feel like I'm probably going to just. I don't want to suffer by myself.
Oh, I get you.
So I'm going to reach out to a couple people, and hopefully a couple people will reach out to me, and we'll set up a time. However, tonight at 9:45 EDT or around 10ish, we are going to be doing that time of the month because we postponed from this past Tuesday to tonight. So we will see you guys tonight. We're talking about, remember we did the relationship one?
Yeah,
we're doing that,
but who are you doing with?
That with Sweet Heathen, me, Golden Unicorn, and once Nikki.
Okay, well I'll check it out because you know I like all those people. So fun.
Yep.
All right. Good night, guys. Thanks for watching. Leave comments, like, subscribe, share, join, all that happy stuff. We appreciate it. Bye.